This happened about 8 years ago, ironically, on Halloween night. It was pretty late, close to midnight, so all the kids in the neighborhood had already gone home. Even our neighbors across the way had stopped playing their corny Halloween tape. You know, the ones with the creaking door sounds and witch cackling. It was just me and my cousin Q sitting in the living room. Now, my other cousin, who was about 4 years old, had left her doll laying on the floor, face down. It was one of those baby live dolls or something like that, the ones with the moving eyelids. Q had issues with that doll the moment it was bought. She hated it and said it was creepy. In fact, she often threw it down the basement stairs. I had no problems with it, and so it stayed on the floor so my little cousin could pick it up in the morning. It was very quiet for about half an hour until I heard a loud, rasping, shuffling noise that seemed to be coming from outside. It sounded like an older man right outside our window. I turned to Q, who looked back at me. "Did you hear that? It's probably the neighbor's tape again," she said. Q finally looked up from her laptop. It was silent for another minute before we heard the rasping noise again, louder this time. It sounded like the man was trying to say something. I got up from the couch and peeked out the window. Absolutely no one out there, not even in the street. Our neighbor's house was dark. It was as still as any night in our quiet neighborhood. "There's no one out there," I said, looking back to Q. She didn't say anything. I was kind of getting freaked out. Another minute passed, and this time there was whispering, but loud whispering. I remember it sounded like a kid and a woman. Q finally looked up from her laptop. "It's that dude," she said. Of course she thought it was. She was very superstitious. I gave her a skeptic look. Let me say this, I don't believe in the paranormal. I leant down and picked up the doll. It was fine. I forgot to say that it had a voice box thing in it, but it didn't have any batteries. I put it back down. "No, it's not. Just leave it alone," I told her. It was silent again. I went back to my seat on the couch. The rasping started again, and I heard the man say something garbled, followed by wheezing. I jumped up from the couch. I was going to see if it was coming from the backyard. Just as I started walking, I noticed that the doll had moved a little. I picked it up again and turned it over. Its eyes were open, and it was heavier than before. I dropped it, and Q threw it down the basement again. I still have no idea what to think. Q denies it ever happened, and my little cousin never asked about her doll after that. I saw the doll only one time after that, on the top basement step, laying on its side. This time, I pushed it down the steps. My parents are divorced, and I was living with my dad. I'm an only child, so the only time I was around kids my own age was when I was out making friends with kids on the block. There was this one kid that lived on the corner of my block. His name was Ethan. I met him while riding my bike. He strangely invited me over to shoot some hoops with him, so I did. He was a lot older than me. I was 12 and he was 16. I found out after hanging out with him a lot that he was an only child as well, and that he also lived with his dad. At first, I found him very relatable. I gave him my phone number, and he would call to hang out sometimes. He would come over and play video games, but then he started getting weird. He would call non-stop. If I didn't answer, he would begin to leave annoyed messages. He would call 5 or 6 times before coming over and ringing the bell. If my dad wasn't home, I usually didn't answer it, but when he was home, he would force me to hang out with Ethan, even though I told him he was creepy. I biked with Ethan back down to his house while pretending to listen to him babble on about stupid. This kid would never shut up. I needed to find a way to get him to stop looking for me. Then, for the first time, he invited me into his house. I really didn't want to go in, but it didn't seem I had a choice. The second I walked into the door, the foul, disgusting odor of his house filled my lungs. Clothes were tossed all over the floor. broken glass in one corner of the room, and what looks like coffee stains on the wall. It was the most disgusting place I'd ever seen, and then a huge, shady-looking man walked out from another room. He looked at me with a very intimidating look. I felt myself backing up away from him until Ethan introduced him as his father. The man just gave me a big grunt and settled off into another room. It was official. This kid was a creep. I needed to get away from him for good. I decided I didn't even want to be in that house anymore and just made up some excuse to go. I think that I said that I forgot I had a doctor's appointment, and at that moment his smile slowly faded as an unhappy, if not extremely angry, expression crossed his face. He didn't even give me any response. He just looked at me with this unnerving stare. I left in a hurry and ran back down the block to my house. The door was locked, surprisingly. I unlocked it with the key my dad made me carry and found that he wasn't home. I really wanted him to be home. And then I found a little sticky note on the fridge saying he was called into work for a possible storm emergency. So that night, before going to sleep, I checked my email for a response from somebody on eBay, but instead I had about 5 new emails, all titled in capital letters, and they were all sent from an email named ethan20ao.com. It was him. I never gave him my email and still have no idea how we got it. One of the emails was titled, "You made a mistake." Another was titled, "I know where you live," and the rest were filled with profanity and threats. I was only 12 and was extremely intimidated by this, so I was ready to call my dad, but as soon as I was heading to the kitchen phone, I heard the sound of rustling bushes outside. I opened the blinds of the window that was facing the bushes and was greeted by the face of a huge man who I instantly recognized as Ethan's dad. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, he was already gone. When my dad came home early, because of the situation, we went on to get a restraining order as soon as possible. Ethan and his dad moved out about a month after that. I moved into a house that my aunt and uncle had been renting out for several years after they built a new place. I spent a few months alone before a buddy from work if I was looking for a roommate. I thought about it for a few days and ended up allowing him to move in. It was a 2-bedroom place with a Denon office in the garage. He decided he wanted his own space, as the bedrooms were right next to each other. So he moved his stuff into the office in the garage, and I have to admit, it was a pretty cool setup he had. The only problem, he didn't have a bathroom or kitchen out there, so we would use the kitchen and toilet in the house. We worked different schedules, so I would often leave the house unlocked for him. One night, I went to my girlfriend's house for dinner. After I got back, I decided to grab a 6-pack of beer I had bought the previous night. When I opened the fridge, my beer was gone. I assumed it was my roommate and went into a blind rage. I stormed out into the garage and slammed his bedroom door open. He was sleeping and rolled over. I screamed at him, asking why he drank my beer without asking. He said he didn't touch my beer and rubbed the sleep out of his eyes. Having lived with him for a while, I was pretty good at judging when he was lying. I felt he was telling the truth. My heart sank as I came to the realization that somebody had stolen our beer from the fridge and whatever else. We went back into the house and made sure everything was in its place. The TV was there, all the furniture. It wasn't until I went into my bedroom and realized my $22,000 laptop was gone that we began to panic. My buddy called the cops, and we searched high and low for the beer and laptop, thinking I might have misplaced them. We soon gave up and began to search the yard for whoever had done this. We didn't live alone in this house, though. There was a room that had been built on several years after the house was built. My aunt's dying mother spent her last couple of years living there, as it was easy for my aunt and uncle to care for her during her sickness. When she died, they began to rent the room out to a strange woman before eventually moving out themselves and renting the rest of the house out. The woman remained there until we moved in, and my aunt and uncle had their concerns with her. They believed she was a drug addict, which became evident to us during our stay there. She behaved erratically, and we would hear strange noises from her end of the house all hours of the night. Her brother moved in several months after we did, which was strange because her place was a one-bedroom suite. We figured he just slept on the couch or something. He was even weirder than her, though. He wouldn't acknowledge me when I pulled up into the driveway while he was sitting having a smoke. Trying to make conversation with a guy was pointless. He basically just stared through your soul. One night, he even asked my roommate if he could score him drugs that night. During our search for the burglar, we went out to the garage door, only to find bare footprints in the snow. The footprints led from their suite door to our garage door. We put two and two together and began banging on their door. We said we knew it was him, and he better answer the door. Someone inside lifted the curtain and made eye contact with me, which to this day still gives me chills. The cops showed up and took down all our information. They scattered the house and found nothing and no one. We showed them the footprints and explained that the people living in the suite were drug addicts. We gave the officers their names. They ran the names in their cruiser and came back to inform us that the man had a warrant in another province and was convicted of breaking and entering several years back. The cops knocked on their door for several minutes and identified themselves as police officers, to no avail. They informed us that because the warrant was from out of province, and technically the man hadn't committed a crime there was nothing they could do about it. The cops left, and it was 1 a.m., so my roommate and I went to bed. The door that connects the two weirdos' suite in my part of the house can only be locked from their side of the door. I completely forgot about this before falling asleep. During the night, I heard footsteps outside my door and a few loud bangs. My doorknob began to shake violently. I was barely awake and brushed it off as my roommate. Luckily, I always lock my bedroom door at night. The next morning, I asked my roommate what was so important at 3 a.m. that he would need to try and get in my room. He told me he slept through the night and hadn't even got up to go to the bathroom. My heart sank. I told him what had happened. During the night, I have never been more glad that I locked my door at night due to some silly childhood fear that I've held on to into adulthood. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if I left my bedroom door open and that man got into my room. Needless to say, me and my buddy moved out of that place a few weeks later. It happened on my friend's 21st birthday. We were throwing him a big party filled with alcohol. There were a lot of people I didn't know there. It was just chaotic in the house. There were probably 100 people, but even in all the chaos, I noticed one shady character that stood out. There was an older man sitting in the corner of the room, just kind of watching everybody drinking and dancing. I didn't think much about it at first, assuming it was someone's dad or uncle or something. But as the night died down and more than half of the guests had already left, the man was still there by himself in the corner. At that point, I asked one of my friends who that guy was, and he said he had no idea. We decided to wait until most of the guests had left, figuring maybe he would too, and when the last of the guests were gone, we went back into the living room, and surely enough, he was gone. I felt relieved immediately, even though it wasn't even my house. That man just seemed so out of place, and it was downright creepy. Me and a couple of other friends slept over that night. I slept on the couch in the den. Falling asleep was easy with all the alcohol running through my veins. But staying asleep was a problem. I woke up in the middle of the night feeling insanely thirsty and having to go to the bathroom. I first went to the bathroom since it was closer, and then went up to the kitchen and got a glass of water. When I went back down to the den and laid back down on the couch, I noticed that the sliding door to the coat closet across from the couch had been slightly slid open. It was too dark to see anything else, though, like anything inside of it. I felt a chill run down my spine as I remembered the creepy man sitting in the corner. The idea of that man hiding in the closet immediately popped into mind. I continued. to lay still under the assumption that he was watching me through the open door of the closet. I began to plan my escape. I could jump over the other couch and land right next to the stairway upstairs to the living room, but I just had to gather up the courage to do it. Then I saw the closet door slide open a little more, and that's when I got the courage to run for it. I jumped over the couch and ran up the stairs. I could hear the closet door fully slide open and somebody running after me. I screamed at my friends who were on the couches to wake up. All three of my friends that were in the living room woke up and looked at me as if I were crazy. I knew that we now outnumbered him 4-1, so I looked at the stairs and waited, but he never came up. My friends demanded an explanation. So I told them that the creepy man from earlier was hiding in the coke closet, and he almost chased me up the stairs. Just then, we heard the back door from down in the den open up, and we all looked at each other. We called the cops, but the man was never found. He simply left through the back door. When I was going to college in a small town in the South, I started working at a local TJ Maxx store for some extra cash. Since I was in class during the day, I usually worked the later shifts. One night, I was walking to my car. I think it was about 11 or 11:30. As a safety protocol, all the employees left together, and the security guard would watch from the sidewalk to make sure we all got to our cars all right. I was approaching my car when I heard a car pull up behind me. I turned around, and there was a woman with her teenage daughter in the passenger seat. She rolled the window down and started giving me a story about how they just came into town. I told them the truth, which was that I had no cash on me. I never carry cash, so she just looked at me and asked very hurriedly if I would get into the car with them, go to the gas station, and buy them about $10 worth of gas. I mean, obviously, I said no, and she asked a few more times. It wasn't until I had said no that I noticed the daughter in the passenger seat had been staring at me the whole time, and she was licking her lips and wringing her fingers. At that point, I bolted back to the store where the security guard was, because they had pulled up behind my car, so I would have been stuck there. I told him what had happened. He started walking to their car, and they sped away. Working the night shift always sucked. I work in an office building and would constantly do the night shift since it was the only time it would work out for me. I was just about always the only person on the floor I worked on, possibly in the whole building. There would always be a kind of eerie feeling to being in such a big building with most of the lights out and absolutely no one around. But on the upside, it was peaceful and less stressful, and I was able to get a lot of work done. There was this one night though. It was a Friday night, around 2 o'clock in the morning. I was typing away on my keyboard when I heard a noise from outside my cubicle. It sounded like just a random crack from the walls or something. It's unusual in this building, but I didn't get too concerned about it. I resumed typing away and was once again interrupted by a sound. This time the sound of a computer starting up. He caught me off guard. I was sure nobody else was working the night shift. I stood up on my chair to get a view over the cubicle walls. The glare of a computer screen in the dark was visible in a cubicle on the opposite side of the room. Then I did something stupid, something I regret. I asked if there was anybody there in a yell, hoping to get an answer from a fellow employee. But instead, I saw the glaring light of the computer monitor across the room turn off, and there was, once again, nothing but darkness on that side of the room. I started getting nervous. I turned off the lamp and computer screen so that I wouldn't give away my position to whoever that was. I crouched down and tipped out across to a nearby cubicle. There was just utter silence. I sat waiting for something to happen for God knows how long, but I eventually decided the coast was clear. I tiptoed down past all the cubicles until I reached the opening near the exit door to the stairs and elevators. And that's when I realized that my fearful suspicion was true. There was a man crouched down behind a plant in the corner of the room, dressed in all black. I felt my heart sink as I noticed him, but it didn't seem like he knew that I noticed him. I turned back to the stairway door. There was no way I was going to wait for the elevator and take a chance. I casually opened the door and closed it behind me, proceeding to walk down the stairs. After making it down about 2 flights of stairs, I heard the door above me push open aggressively, followed by manic, echoing footsteps coming fast down the stairs. I raced down the stairs, running as fast as I could, all while the footsteps above me were getting louder. I finally made it to the first floor, raced through the lobby, and out the front door. Whoever was in there didn't follow me. I immediately called the cops, along with one of my bosses. My boss said no one was scheduled to work except for me. The cops scanned the place from top to bottom. There was no one in there. I did continue to do the night shift for about a week after that, with my boss allowing me to lock all possible entrances to the floor, including the elevators, but I still wasn't comfortable with it. So ever since I've been doing the day shifts. It was 4 a.m. on the Saturday night. I woke up to my stomach rumbling, and nothing is worse than trying to sleep on an empty stomach, so I got out of bed and made my way to the kitchen to make a sandwich. But immediately, I noticed that the cabinet was open. I'm always super obsessive over closing everything I open, so I couldn't believe that I had done that. I found it more odd than most people would. That's just how I am. Most people would shut the cabinet and forget about it. But I went as far as investigating around the house for any unwanted guests. There was nobody in any of the closets I checked, but when I went down to the den, the back door was wide open. I was certain now that someone had been in my house. I somehow had the balls to step outside and turn on the patio light, and there was somebody sitting in one of the patio chairs. He looked at me with a blank expression and got up slowly. He looked filthy, almost homeless. His hair was down to his shoulders. He started walking closer to me. I couldn't tell what his intentions were, and I kind of just stood there, almost taking him as harmless. But he suddenly lunged at me, and I barely had time to shut the door and lock it. We stared each other down for 10 seconds through the glass until I finally realized I should be taking that time to call the cops. I ran to the kitchen to get the phone, and as I was dialing, I noticed when I got back that he was already gone. I still called the cops, but nothing was ever found of the man. This is a very weird story that took place a few months ago. I still live in the same house this happened in. I have an electrical outlet under my bed that I use to charge my phone with. I leave my phone up on the ledge above my bed every night, usually using it as an alarm. However, something strange started happening on a Monday night in February. I woke up to my alarm clock blasting, only it was still dark out. I looked at my actual alarm clock sitting on my desk. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. I wasn't sure if I'd accidentally set a new alarm. The alarm was titled down. I unset it and went back to sleep, not overthinking it. The next night, I woke up again to the sound of my phone's alarm clock blasting. I saw that the time was 3 o'clock in the morning, and the alarm clock title was set to beneath. No way had I set that alarm. I would remember something like that. I figured my brother was playing a joke on me somehow. The next morning, I told my dad to tell him to stop messing with my alarm clock, that it's interrupting my actual sleep on school nights. But he swore on his life that he had never touched it, and I kind of believed him. That night, I put a password on my phone and wrote it on a sticky note, just for safekeeping. I hid the sticky note on the wall behind my bed and made sure no extra alarms were set. The only one was set for 8 a.m. I fell asleep, but once again I woke up to the blasting alarm clock in total darkness. 2 a.m., the alarm was titled the. I was a little freaked out now. Something was really wrong with my phone. I was sure someone was hacking into it. The next day, I left it off for the whole day in hopes that whoever was messing with it would forget about it. And that night, I used my actual alarm clock on my desk as an alarm instead. I set it to 8 a.m. and went to sleep, but when I woke up, there was once again no sunlight. My alarm clock was off, so I couldn't see the time. It was my phone, but the alarm clock sound wasn't the usual marimba. It was some kind of distorted screaming sound. I turned off the alarm, which was titled Bed. It was 1 o'clock in the morning. I was laying there clueless, not knowing what to think. My phone was at 10%, so I reached down under my bed to try and find the charger that's Norm plugged into the wall. It was missing. And then, at the worst possible time, I realized exactly what it all meant. The 4 alarm titles formed a sentence. Down beneath the bed. I tried to pull my arm away, but it was too late. I felt a hand grabbed my arm and squeezed tight. I screamed as loud as I could, loud enough for all the neighbors to hear. I heard my parents' bedroom door open and footsteps running over to my room. My door opened, and my dad barged in with a baseball bat. He saw that I was being pulled down to the edge of my bed. My dad reached under my bed and grabbed a hold of the man hiding under. He knocked him out with the bat and called the cops. The man clearly didn't plan that out, as he basically trapped himself under my bed. Police told us that he was a registered sex offender who had been arrested 10 times. He's extremely messed up in the head and clearly gains pleasure from messing with and scaring his victims. It scares me the most that he was in our house and under my bed for 4 days. The most horrifying experience that ever happened to me didn't even directly happen to me. I have a friend that I'll call Michael. We would hang out, or at least text, every day, but there was this one day that he didn't respond to any of my texts or calls. I went over to his house, which was a block away, to see if he was all right. I knocked and rang, but he didn't answer, which was weird because his car was there. I got the feeling he wanted to be left alone, but late that night I got a FaceTime request from an unknown number. I cautiously answered it with the camera aimed away from my face. A face popped up on the screen, and it was Michael. I felt so relieved and showed my face. When I got a little better look at his face, I noticed he looked different, like a lot more tired. And I don't know, paranoid, I guess. And he was also in an unfamiliar room. I asked him where he was and why he wasn't answering, to which he responded that he was fine and he was at home. I asked him whose phone he was using, and he just took a long pause before answering. He just blankly stared at the camera until finally answering that he was using his uncle's phone. That was really weird, but before I could question him further, he all of a sudden demands that I lend him $10,000 and that he'll pay me back. I can't help but laugh at this until I see that he's serious. More than just serious, his facial expression filled with what looked like worry. I asked him why the hell he needed so much money, and there was once again a huge pause, with him just staring into the camera. He finally says he has to go, and with that the call ended. It was probably one of the weirdest and most unnerving experiences of my life. I had never seen him act so weird. Something was clearly wrong with him, but it was late, and I figured I would just go over to his house and talk with him. The next day, first thing in the morning, I went straight over to his house and rang the doorbell about 10 times. He didn't answer. I eventually gave it up as a lost cause. If he wanted to act sketchy, that was his problem. But late that night, around the same time, I received another FaceTime call from another unknown number. I answered it, and it was again Michael, but this time he looked like his hair was a mess. He had a cut on his forehead. He had bags under his eyes. I didn't understand what the hell was wrong with him. He wouldn't tell me anything. He just kept demanding $10,000 to be paid to some random address, to which I kept telling him no, and then he said something that still haunts me. He said in a shaky, nervous voice, "Come on, don't point a gun at my back." It hit me like a bullet as he said this, accompanied with an ever so slight twitch of his left eye, to which I interpreted as a wink, but then the call ended abruptly, and I can only imagine what was going to happen to him. By some miracle, I remembered the address and sent the cops there right away. It was an old abandoned house on a basically deserted block miles away from my house. They found Michael in the basement, beaten senseless and barely alive, but they got to him just in time. The sicko that did this to him was already long gone. Michael doesn't like to talk about it, but the most he told me was that he was walking home before everything went black, and he woke up in a dark basement. I was up late reading on a cold night. My bedroom is on the first floor, and I live alone in a relatively quiet and wooded area. For that reason, a lot of my windows didn't have any blinds, since it wasn't as if people driving by were able to look into my house. Plus, I like waking up to the sunlight shining in my bedroom. But this one night made me regret never getting blinds in the bedroom. After finally shutting my reading lamp to get some shut-eye, I had a good 2 minutes of silence before I heard the sound of something hitting the window. It sounded like a single tap from a person's fist. I was facing away from the window and didn't want to turn around. I was used to hearing things like tree branches brush up against the walls and windows, but I distinctly recognized the sound to be a fist hitting glass. The thought that somebody might be outside my window watching me frightened me. The fact that somebody would walk all the way onto my property to my bedroom window, I tried to accept that maybe it was just a tree branch, but a second and single knock at the window confirms my fear. It was a fist hitting the glass, and somebody was outside my window. I figured that if I just ignored it, they would go away. Maybe it was just some punk trying to mess with me. If they thought I was sleeping, they would get bored. Another knock at the window came, and I desperately tried to just stay still and show no reactions. But when the fourth knock came routinely, I decided enough was enough. I should confront this jerk like a real man. I turned to the window and just barely caught a glimpse of a black shadow quickly moving under the window. For some reason, actually seeing something at the window killed any courage I had, and I ran to the kitchen phone and called the police. They said they would have an officer over in 10 minutes. When I hung up, I saw something in the corner of my eye. I turned my head and saw somebody standing outside my kitchen window, surely looking at me. Only for a second though, because as soon as I noticed, he took off. Somebody was watching me through all the windows. Then I received a disturbing phone call. It was my neighbor, who also happens to be my best friend. He happened to notice through his window that 3 people dressed in black walked onto my property earlier, one of them with a sharp, shiny object in his hand. This only made me panic even more. I ran upstairs, where I knew I couldn't be watched, and hid in the bathroom. I heard constant single knocks at the front door downstairs. No way it was the police. I just prayed they would get there in time. And thankfully, moments after the knocking stopped, I heard heavy banging at the front door, followed by someone screaming, "Police." It turned out to be the cops, but whoever the 3 men were already gotten into the woods. It might have been more than 3? I don't even know. All I know is they were never caught, and that I went out to get blinds the same week. Before we continue to the next story, I just want to say thank you so much to all our viewers and supporters. You all are truly amazing. If you would like to further support our channel, please consider donating to the channel through the Super Thanks feature and also subscribing to our channel memberships, which come with a lot of fun perks and privileges. This support will help us put out more amazing content just like this one. I moved to my dad's when I was 10, and I didn't know anyone in the area except for the family my dad was friends with, a single mom with 3 kids. Luckily, there was a girl a couple years older than me. She was 12 at the time I met her, and we got to know each other a little over a couple years. We weren't close, but we ended up having the same friends. One night my friend Ben was hanging out with her and her younger brother. They happened to be in the house alone because of my friend's mom was at work. Her mother's been helping this one lady through her work and got to know her fairly well. She found out her sister was in a mental institution and was let out recently. The night Ben is hanging out with my friend, they get a knock on the door. My friend thought it was just their mom, since she knocks a certain way when coming in, and he answered it without thinking. Ben wasn't supposed to be there, and he took off through the window to his house down the road. He never thought twice about it. It wasn't her mom. It was the sister of the lady her mom was helping, and she figured out from talking to her sister where her family lived and her mom's working schedule. She came in. This is where I don't know the details, and I'm glad I don't. My friend's younger brother got away to the neighbor's house to call the police. Delaney brutally murdered my friend a week from Christmas, decapitated her, and left her body naked in a bathtub. She even hit her head. They had to look through the presents, and I don't know where they found it, but they did. I wasn't allowed to go to her funeral. It happened to my wife's grandmother about 13 years ago, while we were still dating. Her husband had just passed away about a year previously, but she'd been going down to the library and volunteering. He was exercising socialization. This was in the winter, so her walk back was while it was getting dark. The library closed at 5 o'clock, and there was some extra stuff to do before everyone actually left. And on this particular night, she turned down a ride from another volunteer because she needed to stay in shape. The house is about a mile away, through some lightly wooded area in a small town in the southern US. And as she's about halfway home, she notices someone behind her. He's walking the same direction and gaining on her, which in itself isn't all that particular. She's old and thus not particularly fast, but in this case, he seems vaguely sinister. They keep walking. Pretty soon he's right behind her. Then he falls into pace, just staying behind her. Now she knows something's up, but she's almost home. She can see the top of her driveway coming up, and she leaves her lights on so it'll look like someone's home when she's walking in. She just needs to make it another 150 yards. And 100. All that time, she said, he was so close that she could feel his breath on her neck. Around maybe 50 yards it happens. A strong hand on her shoulder. Okay, don't turn around and hand over your purse or I'll cut you. She stops for a second, then takes one big step forward, turns, and shoots the guy in the neck with the .38 she keeps in her purse. The guy spent the next 5 years in a prison hospital before he died of complications. When I was young, I'd say 8 to 11-ish, my sister, whom is 7 years older, would babysit when my parents were out. At the time, she smoked a lot, and my parents made her smoke outside, of course. So I'd follow her outside, play around, annoy her, and such. One day my sister notices a car at the end of the driveway, just sitting in the road. It's a white SUV with a bike rack on top. It has the most tinted windows I've ever seen. Who could not see inside from the side? It sat there until she went inside, then would drive to the end of the road and sit at the church parking lot and wait. Wait until she'd come out again for another smoke, and it would repeat this. Odd, but my sister's a brave lady and just kind. I've ignored it. That is until the next day, while my parents were out again, and it showed up again. It would sit at the end of the driveway and just watch. I don't know what the driver was doing, but he was watching my sister. I know, because if I didn't go out, I'd watch from the front window, and it would just sit there and watch my sister. She told my father, who was a sheriff's deputy at the time, and he called the cops and made a complaint. They showed up, looked around, but the SUV was nowhere to be seen. Months went by, him nothing. Then one day, a good 9 months after this had all started, and around 4 months since the last sighting, it was back. It became a regular occurrence. Another day my sister was outside doing her nasty habit, and sure enough, here it comes. This time we were all alone as usual, and she decides she's had enough. She tells me to stay in the carport, and she's gonna go confront them. She starts walking toward the SUV, and halfway down the driveway she would later remark to us, I felt her Turo, like I knew if I went any further I was dead. I was paralyzed by pure fear. She turned around and went inside. Finally, the family car was in the shop for some kind of issue, so we were all stuck home for the night while my parents are home. My sister goes outside to smoke. I go outside with her, and eventually the SUV shows up. She tells me to run inside and tell my father, and I do. My dad promptly gets his gun and starts briskly walking down the driveway with it in hand in the direction of the SUV, but not leveled towards it. The SUV floored it down the road and peeled out onto the nearby large highway. My dad, being a cop, noted the year and model and distinguishing features. The scariest thing, the license plate had been covered in duct tape. We never saw it again. I was just 4 or 5 years old, and my parents had just separated. My mom was living in a 2-bedroom apartment. I had my own room, but I preferred to sleep in her bed whenever I was staying with her. Our 2 bedrooms were at the end of the hallway, directly across from each other. Our apartment was on the 1st floor, and I remember that it was in the middle of the summer, and my mom had a window open in her room, which was directly behind the bed above the headboard. Anyways, I woke up in the middle of the night and remember sitting up and seeing that our cat was sitting in the doorframe of my mom's room. I should note her door was open. Then you could partially see into my bedroom. This was strange because our cat was typically always in bed with us. As I was watching him, he walked into my bedroom and meowed. I turned to face my mom and woke her up. In the 3 or 4 seconds it took me to wake her up and ask me what was wrong, we both looked back up at the doorframe, and there was a man standing by my open door, making his way out of the bedroom. I still don't know how she managed to do it so quickly, but my mother proceeded to pick me up and literally throw me out of the screen window. She quickly followed, and we were able to start screaming for help, and someone called 911. The police came, but didn't see any signs of forced entry, only that our front door was unlocked, which led them to believe that the man must have exited that way. The strange thing was that my mom swore up and down that she had locked the door that night with the deadbolt and chain lock. About a week later, she was cleaning the kitchen and opened up our water heater closet and found a notebook with names and drawings, as well as a pair of gloves and some gum wrappers. The police were called again, but all they could do was speculate that the man had been in our house and hid until we were asleep. This happened to a friend of mine. She told me about it about a year or so ago. We'll call her Sophia. Sophia's in early 20s and works as an English tutor in South Korea. One evening a few years ago, she was tutoring a high school boy. They were up studying pretty late, and the buses stopped running, being a long way from his house. The boy asked if he could crash on her floor overnight and get the first bus in the morning. Sophia was very reluctant because inviting a teenage male student to stay the night didn't sound like a great idea. But he was begging her, and eventually she relented. They went back into her 1-room apartment, and she got into the bed wall. He laid a blanket out on the floor, and they both fell asleep. A few hours later, at maybe 2 a.m., the boy wakes Sophia up. "I'm really hungry," he says. "Let's go get some food." Sophia opens her eyes and looks up at him in disbelief. "Food now? It's 2 a.m. Go back to bed." But the student insists, "No, I'm so hungry. Let's eat something now." She tells him that there's some ramen in the kitchen and he could fix himself some. This doesn't satisfy him. He doesn't want ramen. There's a 24-hour place just down the road. Let's go there. Eventually, after several minutes of persuasion, the boy gets Sophia to come with him to the restaurant. They leave the apartment and head out. As soon as they're on the street, the boy turns to Sophia and says, "I'm not hungry. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked under your bed. There's a man sleeping there?" They called the police and discovered that a homeless man had been living in Sophia's apartment, sleeping under the bed for 2 months. The boy only saw him because he was lying on the floor, so he had a clear view under the bed. Must be punctuated with 100% accuracy without losing even a single word. I was driving a shortcut from Prescott to Santa Fe. 29 Palms is located in the desolate high desert east of LA. The shortcut was all 2-lane road through total nothingness, except for a passing through Jerome. Jerome is a nearly abandoned town, nearly as far below sea level as Death Valley. So I was driving by myself in the afternoon and proceeded to drive up into the mountain range between Jerome and I-40. Once I reached the top, I'm driving north through a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. Up ahead, I see some stuff in the middle of the road. As I approached, I slowed down to see a red Pontiac Fiero stop sideways across both lanes, a suitcase open with clothes scattered everywhere, and two bodies laying face down in the road, a man and a woman. I stopped 100 feet or so away, and the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Being a Marine, I reached under the seat and pull out a 9mm pistol and chamber around. Something seemed very wrong. It looked too perfect, as if it were staged in the ambush. Something was just wrong. As I scanned the road, I saw a line. I could drive past the guy in the road on his left, swerved to the right of the woman behind the Fiero, and I'd be on the other side. I dropped it into first gear, punched it down, and drove the line I planned. I passed the back of the Fiero without hitting it or either of the bodies in the road. I continued forward a couple of 100 feet and slowed down so I could breathe and let my heart slow down. As I looked up into the rearview mirror, I saw that the two bodies had gotten out to their knees, and 20 or so people emerged from the tall grass on either side of the road by the car and bodies. At that moment, my right foot smashed the gas pedal to the floor and did not let up until I had to slow down for the I-40 East on-ramp. Some friends and I were doing some night fishing on the Snake River. We were sitting along the shoreline, with a nice fire going, accompanied by the usual idle talk and a few beers, when suddenly everyone just stopped talking, like a switch was flipped off. We were all staring across the river and felt as if something or someone was staring back. It was a very uneasy feeling, to which some of the group tried to shake off with typical macho humor, when a blood-curdling sound erupted from the other. Sure, that froze everyone in their tracks. The sound was unlike any other that I had ever heard, and it made every hair on my body vibrate and tingle. The only way I could describe it is, it sounded like a wild person with no language skills being gutted alive. No words, just this high-pitched, blood-curdling scream. Nobody moved or said a word. We all just sat there fixed in our stare. Then, just as suddenly, a second scream was let loose, with even more force than the first. By this time, several of us were sprinting to our trucks that were parked a few yards away, retrieving various firearms. When we got back, we all sat there quietly with our eyes fixed, staring toward the opposite shore, watching the light from our fire reflecting off the rocks. We sat there waiting for another scream or something to move on the other side of the river. Finally, a third scream came just as suddenly, but this time it was on our side of the river, coming from the bushes about a yard away. We all hightailed out of there, leaving most of our stuff behind. When we got to our trucks, we heard the scream one more time, just beyond the tree line. We all floored it the hell away from there and never found out what was making the sounds. It was a Friday night, and my friend was picking me up in his car from my house. I was in a hurry since we were running late for the hockey game in the city. The whole car ride there, we were having such a good time that I hadn't even noticed that I didn't have my phone. I searched the car seat, the floor, but it wasn't in the car. I was sure that I had just forgotten it during the hockey game. I couldn't stop worrying that maybe I had dropped my phone somewhere, so I borrowed my friend's phone and ran to the bathroom. I dialed my number and hoped someone at my house will pick up. It took 3 rings before somebody picked up, but they remained silent on the other end. I yelled into the phone that I was just checking if I'd left my phone at home. They didn't answer. I assumed it was my little brother just messing with me, so I hung up. I got home late that night to see that my parents weren't home. I got inside my house and called them to see where they were. They told me that they had gone out to eat and see a concert at the park with my little brother. They said they left soon after I had for the game, and they should be home in around half an hour. So I hung up and proceeded to look for my cell phone. But then I realized How could somebody in my family have picked up my phone if they hadn't been home? I felt a pain in my ethnac as fear swept over. It was at that moment that I heard the back door to my house open and closed. I immediately jolted out the front door to the neighbors and called the police. Apparently, the back door was left open and somebody had simply walked into her house. Nothing was stolen, but the scariest thing is the thought that we could have fallen asleep with a stranger in the house. A while back, there was a family that moved in next door to my family. They had a son who was just twisted. He was obsessive over slasher movies and always wanted me to talk about that. Happened during my time serving in Vietnam that no normal person would want to hear. He also loved tormenting stray animals. This guy was a whack job. He was 19 at the time, and my daughter was 7, but he always wanted to talk to her. He'd strike up conversation with her when she walked home from school. He would talk over the fence at her when she was playing in the back, but what really set me off was when he called her house, looking to speak to her. That was it. I went over and flipped at him, and his parents told him to stay the hell away from her, and I'd better not ever see him again. That's when things got weird. My daughter was always a little imaginative and paranoid. She would think there were monsters under her bed and whatnot. So when she told me there was something living in her closet, and she was too scared to get up and tell us at night, but it wasn't there in the daytime, we blew it off as no big deal. A few weeks went by, and one night my wife and daughter were staying at my mother's for a girls' night. So I turned the key on the HBO box and watched me some movies, eventually falling asleep downstairs. At around 2 a.m., I get a call from my neighbor with the creepy son telling me something along the lines of, "We saw that you were up, so he called. Our son is missing." I went by his room to use the bathroom, and his door was open, which is unusual. And there was no sign of him. We need help looking for him. The phone call woke me up, though I wasn't up, so I asked why they thought I was. "Oh, he saw you walking around upstairs, and the light is on." My blood ran cold. I'd been passed out on the couch, and I know no one turned any lights on. I hung up on them, ran outside to my truck to grab my shotgun, but noticed the sheriff pulling up to my neighbor's house. By this point, I booked it over and told them there was someone in my house, and now I could see the lights in my daughter's room were on, and there's a silhouette pacing back and forth. When the deputies went in, they found the neighbor bored. They're waiting, in my daughter's room with a nice little setup in her closet. He said he likes to watch her sleep in the moonlight. One day, while doing my laundry, one of the lights blew out in my basement. My basement is set up so that the laundry room is split up from the other side of the basement with a wall on the door. In order to get upstairs, you have to exit the laundry room and go through the other part of the basement. So the light blew in the other part, not the laundry room, as it was the only light on that side. It was pretty dark. I finished the laundry I had to do while dreading the walk through the dark basement. I exit the laundry room, get halfway through the basement, and I hear a loud cackle. Imagine a sound people make when they imitate a witch. Take that and imagine the witch had been smoking for 50 years, making her voice deeper and hoarser. That's what I heard, clear as day, right behind me. I didn't hesitate to bolt for the stairs. I waited until my father got home and then changed. The Bulba have yet to hear that cackle since, and I've not told a single person in the house about it. I'll never forget this night. The pizza place I worked at was about to close, and I was getting ready to go home when the phone rang. I was working the counter alone that night, so I was taking calls. I picked up the phone. There was complete silence, so I hung up. About a minute later, the phone rings again, so I pick up again, still silence. I was about to hang up again when I heard the very weak and cold voice of an old woman on the other end. She said she wanted a regular pie delivered. I remained polite on the phone, but on the inside I was screaming. I just wanted to get home and end my shift. I called out to my boss that somebody is requesting a delivery. He told me I had to go. I was upset at first, but I realized it's another tip, and the old ones usually tipped the most, so I decided it was okay. I took down the address and told her it would be there soon, but she had already hung up. I thought that was rude, but I ignored it and yelled to the chef that I needed one regular. My boss told me to just go home after the delivery, as the place would be closed. So a little before 10 o'clock, I got in my car and put the address into my GPS. The house was 7 miles away. The GPS took me to the quiet side of town. I arrived to the house. It was a small one-floor house in a very quiet and empty block. I took the pizza and walked up to the door and rang the doorbell. There were no lights on in the house. I hoped that she hadn't given me the wrong address. I rang the doorbell again. There was still no answer. I was about to give up when I turned my head and saw somebody standing at the window. I got a little freaked out and backed up at first, but I eventually got closer to the window to see the person. It was an old woman, probably in her late 70s. She was just staring at me with a blank expression. I yelled to her through the gliss that I her pizza. She didn't react to what I said, so I screamed it louder. A big smile ran across her face, not a pleasant, genuine smile. There was a smile that sent chills down my spine. I still remember that exact face she made through the window. I decided that I was freaked out enough and got back to my car and set the pizza in the passenger seat. I had to text my boss about this. I shot him a quick text and started my car, ready to get the hell away. I looked to my right to get one more look to see the woman standing right outside my passenger side window, giving me the same stare she had given me before. I put my car in drive in Florida down the street, not looking back. My boss never made me do a late night delivery again. This happened 4 years ago when I was still in high school. I was told to do my last delivery of my shift. I got in my car, which was a 1999 Camry, perfect for delivering pizzas, a GPS, the address of my phone. I live upstate in the country, so all pizza deliveries were long drives. I remember the sun was starting to set, so it was probably around 7 o'clock, I'd say. After a good 15 minutes of driving through the foresty dirt roads, my GPS said I had arrived. It was an old little cottage lake house made almost entirely of wood. It was sitting all by itself in the middle of absolutely nothing but forests. The lawn was completely unkept as the grass was almost at knee height. I was used to this kind of thing, so I didn't think much of it. I took the pizza to the front door. There was no door, though, so I knocked loudly on the door. Within 10 seconds, I heard the sound of footsteps hitting wood on the inside of the house. The footsteps made it to the door and stopped. I started to feel uneasy. I got the feeling that I was being watched, and that's when I noticed there was a peephole on the door. "It's the pizza guy?" I called out. I heard a low, harsh-sounding voice on the other side of the door telling me to bring the pizza out back. I didn't like the idea of going back there if something didn't seem right. "Are you sure, sir?" I called out. He didn't answer my question. The sound of footsteps didn't move away from the door, so I had the feeling he was still watching me. I almost found myself walking back to my car, but I decided I didn't want any trouble with my boss. The last time I brought a pizza back, he gave me attitude, so I reluctantly walked through the uncut grist and around the small house to the back. I remember there was a shed and a little patio back there. In the patio there was a table with 4 chairs surrounding it. In one of the chairs facing away from me, I saw the head of somebody sitting in the seat. I began walking over and said, "Excuse me?" But the person didn't even move an inch. "Excuse me," I said again louder. Then from behind me I heard, "Over here." I turned around to see a man poking his head out from the corner of the house, looking at me with a crazed smile. "Come over here. I want to show you something." I freaked out, turned around, and ran around the house in the opposite direction, back to my car. for some reason, still holding the pizza. I got in my car, started it, and got away from there. On my way back to the pizzeria, I pulled over to the side of the road and called the police. Eventually, I was informed that there was no sign of anybody having been in that house for a long time. I quit my delivery job a few days after that. I have no idea what would have happened to me had I gone up to that man, but to this day I still wish I just turned my head to see who or what were sitting in that patio chair. I was doing late-night deliveries during this particular shift when I worked this job. I lived in the Ozark Mountains. It was very rural up there. I often found myself driving down roads surrounded by nothing but trees, just like this night, only it was dark and foggy this time. Driving down a shortcut to town that I had taken many times before. I slam on the brakes when I see somebody jump out from the bushes onto the road. The sickening bump and thump from the front of the car confirmed that I had hit the person. I put my hand to my forehead, cursing to myself. I couldn't believe what just happened. I just hit a person. I got out of my car and checked to see if they were all right. It was a man wearing a black hoodie with the hood up. He lay motionless by my car tire. I had no idea what to do at this point. I was panicking. Why the hell was this guy in the middle of nowhere? Why did he jump in front of my car? And then things got weirder. I can hear a scream. A scream for help coming from the woods to the left of me. Somebody was in trouble. I looked at the man I hit with my car. He was still on the ground, motionless. I'd only be gone for a minute, I figured. For whatever stupid reason, I thought it was okay to leave the man behind to go into the woods. I moved in the direction I heard the scream originally, hoping to hear another, but it was just total silence, except for the night creatures making their sounds. "Where are you?" I yelled out. It was at that moment I heard the sound of a foot crushing the leaves on the ground. I turned in the direction of the sound, and even in the dark and foggy weather I could still make out the figure of somebody hiding behind a tree opposite me. I ran as fast as I could back to my car, looking back constantly to make sure I wasn't being followed. When I got back to my car, the man I had hit was gone. I didn't stick around to wonder where he went. I just got back in my car and proceeded down the road. My heart was racing the whole drive-through, but I still ended up delivering the pizza. I got to the house, and when I rang the bell, a middle-aged woman answered. After paying, I noticed that her eyes focused on something behind me, and then she asked me, "They let you guys have delivery partners now?" I was confused and asked her what she meant, and she told me, "You got someone with you in your car?" I felt a pain in my stomach as I turned and saw somebody sitting in the back seat of my car. I called the cops using the woman's phone, and they arrived shortly after. But the person in the back seat of my car was already gone. The scariest thing about this whole story, the police found a blood-stained knife on the floor of my car where the man was hiding. This memory still haunts me every day, and I can genuinely tell you it's painfully scary just to imagine how things could have turned out if I hadn't made the delivery. I was searching Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace for a new phone. This was a long time ago, so it had to be like an iPhone 7 even, or something. The phone still had the home buttons back then. I found this listing for a phone. It was some generic-looking post, iPhone whatever, for sale, new, around $300. It was a really good deal for the time that I remember. He told me all the small details I needed to know, that it was factory unlocked, never opened, and stuff like that. He sent me a video of the box too, still sealed. The guy, whose name was Ryan, seemed nice and easy to talk to over text. I got his number, and we discussed a pickup point. His location on the Facebook ad was much closer to me, but over text, he was telling me he was only there this morning, and now he went about an hour north. I wasn't happy about this, but this was a really good deal, and I didn't want to pass it up. I started asking a bunch of friends if they'd want to come on an adventure with me. Really, just a way of making the chore of accompanying me for an hour drive seem fun. My friend Lily actually agreed to come with me, on the promise that I buy her food for coming. So, this Ryan guy sent me the address of a police precinct about an hour away, saying he only does deals in police precinct parking lots to avoid scams. I obviously had no problem with this. In fact, it made me feel a little more confident in this whole thing. I picked up Lily on the way, around 8:30 at night, and off we went. She, being in the car and having someone to talk to, made the trip more fun. It was also a Friday night, so afterwards we could go out and do whatever we wanted. When I got off the highway, we were about 10 minutes away, and we found ourselves in a very secluded, quiet area. It seemed like a lot of different wooded areas, occasional buildings and houses, and then more woods. We got to the police precinct, and there was no one visibly parked in the parking lot besides empty police cars, of course. We drove around the whole building a couple times and didn't see this Ryan guy, who said he was in a black Ultima. So, I decided to call him. He picked up and said he's having issues with his car on the side of the road and asked if I could come to him. He sent his location, and I checked it. He was on the side of some random road, with nothing on either side. And by nothing, I mean woods. That's the kind of area we were in. He asked me to come help him jump his car. He had jumper cables. I said, yeah, I guess I can do that. I mean, we drove the hour to get there. I didn't want to just drive another hour for nothing. Lily was shaking her head the whole time I was on the phone. The guy said, "See you soon," and hung up. Lily then basically screamed, "No way. This is sketchy. We're going home." I told her, "We'll just drive past the location he sent and see what's up." I did agree with her, though. This seemed incredibly sketchy. I was just very upset. If we drove 2 hours for nothing. We did drive to the location, and when we got to it, we saw the reflection of a car's front lights coming up on the pitch-black road we found ourselves on. As we got closer, I slowed down, and it was, in fact, a black car, but we couldn't see anyone inside or outside of it. Mind you, it was very dark, but I feel like we would have seen someone's head on the inside or something. Lily said to just keep driving, and I said I know. It was about the sketchiest thing I'd ever seen. A pitch-black road between two patches of woods. No streetlights, no other cars in sight. A pretty convenient place to break down and have someone who's coming with a wad of cash to buy something from you come and meet. I drove right past it. Immediately, Ryan starts calling me over and over. I ignored every single call. Then he texted me saying, "I saw you just pass me. Why didn't you stop? Turn around." Ignored. Lily is a very positive person, so she laughed about this whole situation, and then said, "Okay, you owe me food." So I looked up the nearest diner, and we stopped there for some food. It was a quiet, small diner. We were just about the only people in there, even on a Friday night. The waitress just took our coffee order when a lone guy, with his hood up, steps into the diner and sits in one of the bar stools. He glanced over to Lily and I, then looked straight ahead, talking to the lady working behind the counter, apparently ordering a coffee. The man kept glancing at our table like every minute. So I whispered to Lily, "Don't look now, but that guy at the counter might be the Ryan guy." The waitress came with our coffees, asked if we were ready to order. I said, "A few minutes, please." When the lady behind the counter handed that man his coffee, he said, loud and clear, "Thank you, darling." It was that guy from the phone's voice, Ryan, or whatever his real name was. I told Lily, "That's him. We need to pay the check and leave." I waved the server over and whispered to her, if we can just get the check. She asked if something's wrong, and I noticed the guy look over as I said this. I said, "Yes, we just needed some coffee for the road," so she got the check. I paid. We downed our coffees and left the building. We got in my car, and Lily said, "Oh my God, he's getting up." I looked into the diner and saw that guy leaving towards the door. as quickly as possible. I drove us out of that parking lot and sped down the road. And yes, we noticed a black car in the parking lot that could have been the one that we saw on the side of the road. I was driving too fast for him to have caught up. We got back on the highway, and I was flying for a while until I got a low tire pressure light come on. I knew instantly. He slashed my tire. The PSI was going down fast. So, to avoid damage, I pulled to the side of the highway and parked it. I went out to confirm that my tire was slashed. I had to replace the tire with the spare, which took about 15 minutes. The whole thing was a disaster. And if you're wondering, yes, I still got Lily dinner that night. Now Lily and I look at it as a crazy story that we can look back on and tell people. It's absolutely horrifying, though, how close we were to walking into a trap. I was seeing this girl for a few weeks. We'd been on 2 dates. Her name was Maya. We matched on a dating app and eventually met a few days later. She was 4 years older than me. Our first date was drinks, and our second date we went out with my friends on a weekend. My friends had neutral opinions about her. They thought she was, quote, nice and kind of quiet. They'd later reveal their actual thoughts on her, but I'll get to that later. Maya invited me to an upcoming high school reunion party. She told me she didn't want to go alone, and honestly, after she came to hang out with my friends and I felt like I owed her this. This reunion party was falling on a random Saturday in the fall. It wasn't organized by her school though. She told me that it was organized by this rich guy from her class, and it was being hosted at his house. I haven't had my high school reunion yet, but as far as I know, these things are usually held at bars or catering halls. We got to this guy's house, and it was admittedly a fancy-looking house. It had a gated driveway, but no fancy cars parked anywhere in sight. I thought, was maybe the owner parked his car in the garage during the party. The second we stepped into the house, I felt like everyone was staring at us, more specifically me. A few people came up to Maya and hugged her, hello, then shifted their attention to me. I felt almost like I was being interrogated with some of the questions these people were asking me. Like my whole life story, what I do for a living, who I live with. Finally, Maya pulled us away. Only need to go talk to more people, who I also felt like were asking really personal and weird questions. There was also something about all the people in here. They seemed to be older looking than 28, which was the age Maya told me she was. Some of these people looked well into their 30s. I made a comment on that to Maya, and she said, yeah, some of these people aren't aging too well. I asked if she remembers all these people, and she said yes. I then asked who the party host was. I was curious to meet the owner of this big house. She said she hadn't seen him yet. Throughout the entirety of me being there, I felt like everybody was shooting me daggers. They wouldn't look away either. I whispered that to Maya, and she said back, it's probably because they're wondering who I am. At the time, that was the only logical explanation I could think of too. It's hard to explain the growing awkwardness at this party, but I can assure you this was not what a normal high school reunion would be like. There was no music, and everyone was dressed weirdly, not like normal 28-year-olds. But that's the other thing. None of these people looked like they were in their 20s. I was getting uncomfortable with some of the stares I was getting in the room we were in. So I told Maya, I'm going to run to the bathroom. Realistically, I just wanted to get out of that room and explore the house a little bit. I didn't have a drink in my hand or anything to make me feel at ease. I was just walking around this giant house empty-handed, and anyone I passed stared at me. To say I felt out of place would be the understatement of the century. I found the bathroom. I stepped inside even though I didn't have to go. I locked myself inside just to sit and regather myself, take a break from the awkwardness outside. I texted all my friends about how weird this reunion was and wondering how I could convince Maya to leave early. We'd already been there about 30 to 45 minutes, and this unnamed mystery party host was nowhere to be seen. Maya texted me, "Where are you?" I replied, in the bathroom. Give me a minute." Then I followed that up with, "This party is really weird. I'm down to leave soon," she said. "Why?" I said. "Everyone's being weird." Then someone knocked on the bathroom door, so I couldn't sit in there anymore. I washed my hands quick and left the bathroom. And the guy waiting outside, who looked like one of the younger ones here, said in a very low voice to me, "You should leave. That girl isn't who she says she is." I froze for a second, then said, "Maya." He said, "Whatever she told you her name is." He then asked what she told me this party was, and I said that she told me it was a high school reunion. The guy then smirked and said, "Do these people look like they're going to a high school reunion?" He left it off with, and I quote, "Trust me, leave sooner than later," and then he walked into the bathroom and shut the door. I almost knocked on the door to get him to come out and further explain, but I thought for a second. I was already suspicious and uncomfortable in this house. That guy just confirmed something weird is going on here. I walked straight to the front door without drawing attention to myself. I still felt people staring at me as I walked to the door. I walked straight from my car in the street and drove home. Maya texted me asking where I went. I didn't answer. When I got home, I looked up her number on White Pages. That number was not associated with the name Maya. The name that came up was Sophie. The address that I picked up at both times is also different than the address that came up on White Pages, which made me realize I never saw her leave the house. She was already waiting on the sidewalk both times. I replied to her text. I had to leave. I'm sorry, and blocked her number. My friends all made jokes, and they told me she thought she was weird and off from the start. But they didn't want to tell me that and make me feel bad. My one friend joked that it sounded like I was in the movie Get Out. My friends and family all have had little theories as to what was going on. Some people would even think I exaggerated the whole thing until I told them about the fake name the girl gave me, the guy telling me to leave sooner than later. When my cousin Liam and I were in our early 20s, we went on a handful of camping trips around Colorado. This happened, I believe, when I was 22 and he was 23, and it happened in a remote national forest. It was my first time camping there, not Liam's though. It was in the middle of the week. Our jobs allowed us to have off days in the middle of the week, and we'd often go to our campouts to avoid traffic and crowds. I always let Liam take charge on these trips. He's the Eagle Scout, not me. We parked by a picnic area, and we set foot into the woods from there. After about 15 minutes of hiking deeper into the woods, we found a good spot to set up camp. A good spot, meaning a big enough clearing to fit 2 tents, the portable stove, and a campfire. The first thing we did was unpack our stuff and set up our tents. Liam has always been a lot quicker than me in pitching a tent. He does it in only a few minutes. It always takes me over 20 minutes. Or rather, it always took me over 20 minutes, as I haven't been camping out in the wilderness since this. The next thing we did was create a ring of stones for a fire, then gathered some sticks and wood. He did bring some fire starter and a lighter, so I guess we kind of cheated, but oh well. It was at the point in the day when the sun was going down. We had a fire going, and now Liam was growing some steak and burgers. One thing about Liam is he always went all out with the food on these trips. And he's a really good cook, so I always trusted him with feeding us. Of course, we had our bear spray in case the smell of the food would attract a black bear, which Liam always said was very unlikely. He always says the real thing you got to worry about in the middle of the woods is other people. As we ate our steak and burgers, we cracked open some beers and had some classic rock playing on the speaker. If you've never been camping, you don't understand how good vibe moments like this are. In the wilderness with a friend or family member and some beers, reminiscing about good times and vibing to music. As it got dark, we started playing card games on this little folding platform table we brought specifically for cards. After playing more traditional card games, we started playing Uno, and this was when we heard something out in the woods. I paused the song on my phone so that the speaker would go silent. It was clear now. We heard a person humming and footsteps from beyond the trees in the pitch blackness of the forest. Liam urged me to find the flashlight. I tried, but by the time I found it, the sounds had faded away. I asked Liam if that was something to be concerned about, and he said it definitely was unusual for someone else to be this deep in the woods, let alone creepily walking by a campsite with an active campfire humming loudly. I was a bit shaken, and I saw Liam was too. We went back to playing cards, with the music much lower now. When we least expected it, a big stick landing in the middle of our campsite made us both jump out of our skin. It didn't fall from a tree. This thing was thrown at us by someone. Liam started yelling something along the lines of, "Whoever's out there messing with us, get a life and fuck off." And then footsteps could be heard once again in the distance. They were walking away from us. I said we should pack up camp and move somewhere else. He said absolutely not, in the dark. We both had bear spray, and he advised to just keep it next to me in my tent when we go to sleep. It was the closest thing to range self-defense weapons we had. We kept hearing sounds like tree branches cracking in the distance, sounds that you would never expect an animal to be making. Someone was out there, maybe multiple people. That much was clear. We had to go to sleep eventually, so we agreed that maybe we should take turns staying up to keep watch, to make sure that no one comes to our campsite and steals anything, or worse. Liam agreed to take first watch. He said he'd stay up and read his book. So I crawled into my tent, and then my sleeping bag and went to sleep, waking up in the middle of the night while camping is normal. You're in a cold outdoor environment, in an uncomfortable sleeping bag. Any number of things could wake you up. I didn't yet know what woke me up. I was still in a fog. My brain didn't feel fully woken up yet. I looked up and saw a head peering into my tent. It looked like Liam. I rubbed my eyes, but really it was the darkness that was preventing me from seeing anything of his face. I said, "Liam," thinking he was waking me up to take my turn of keeping watch. I said, groggy, "Is it my turn?" I stared at the head, peering at me in my sleeping bag, slowly growing more awake every second. Then I heard the zipper to the tent quickly zip up, and his head disappeared. I laid back down in my sleeping bag, but only for a second. I suddenly had some weird moment of clarity, where I shot to an upright position and listened as the footsteps walked away. "Liam," I said. He didn't answer. I unzipped my tent to peek out to the campsite. The fire was dead. Liam wasn't out there. I went over to Liam's tent, which was zipped up. I unzipped it and looked inside to see Liam, fast asleep in his sleeping bag. I got chills, goosebumps, whatever you want to call it. I almost myself at the realization. I started shaking him awake, and when he finally awoke, I told him someone's here at the campsite. It took him a minute to come back to reality, just like I did, but when he did, he grabbed his bear spray. He said he must have dozed off while reading. He said I should sleep in the tent with him tonight, but to do that, I'd need my sleeping bag. He came outside of the tent with me and stood watch as I ran to my tent to grab my sleeping bag in my tent, grabbing my sleeping bag. I heard that goddamn humming again from outside. I grabbed it, and Liam whispered at me to hurry up. I said, "You hear that too?" He said yes. We both got back in his tent and zipped it up, with our cans of bear spray by our sides. I tell you, in those moments, I wanted nothing more than for a bear to come and save the day. The hours dragged on as I stayed up while Liam slept. After 3 long, horrible hours, I woke him up and we switched. When Liam woke me up, it was almost dawn. There was light outside, so we packed everything up, and by the time we were done, there was plenty of light to hike back to the car. While we could have driven somewhere else and had another night of camping elsewhere, neither of us were feeling it anymore. This was a haunting experience, and I think we both just wanted to be in the safety of our houses. It's been 6 years since this happened, and he's hit me up a few times since then about camping, but I haven't really had interest since this experience. People are just too scary. Why was someone out there stalking our campsite? And the sight of that person's head in the dark, just looking into my tent, it was straight up from a nightmare. I may never go camping again, honestly. This was something that happened so long ago that a lot of details are a little blurry. It's not like it happened yesterday. I'll try my best to fill in smaller details that I don't fully remember with how I best remember things played out. It was the last day of school. I was in the 4th grade. 4th grade was the last year in our elementary school where kids had to be picked up by their parents. 5th graders were allowed to walk home on their own. My mom would always be the one to pick me up. On the last day of school, my friend Noah and I had a playdate planned to celebrate the last day of school. Noah wasn't in my class this year, but we had been friends since kindergarten. He was in a different dismissal hallway from me. After school was over, we single file lined up and walked to the exit door at the end of the hall, where we waited outside by our teacher, Miss Carter. I waited for Noah's dad to appear from the crowd of parents shuffling in and out of the parking lot next to the doors. Then I heard my name, Ethan. Ethan, I look over and see a man waving at me as he approached. He introduced himself as Noah's uncle and said he was picking me up. I went over to Miss Carter and said, "I'm being picked up." She asked, "Where is he, sweetie?" And I pointed to Noah's uncle, who waved at Miss Carter. Miss Carter dismissed me, and I went with the man. He led us through the crowd and was a very quick and jittery talker, like he spoke fast and had a bit of a stutter. He was walking incredibly fast. It was almost hard to keep up with him, with my backpack on. He explained to me that his brother, or Noah's dad, was working later than expected, so he was driving me back. We got to his car, which was a dark red hatchback type car, from what I remember. And it took me this long to acknowledge the giant elephant in the room. Where was Noah? Why weren't we picking him up too? The man turned to look at me in the back seat and said that Noah was already at his house. I was shy around people I didn't know, especially adults. And I wasn't one to openly speak my mind if I was confused. But I was very confused. This was making less and less sense the whole drive. The man kept yapping, telling stories of his days in elementary, asking me questions like what sports I played, what we're learning in class. If I had to guess, we were in the car for like 10 minutes, which honestly, for our town where houses were right on top of each other, that was a while. My house was a 5-minute walk away from the school. We were definitely in an area I wasn't familiar with. When he parked the car in front of his house looked pretty normal to me, from what I remember. He led us inside and shut the door and locked it behind us. It was really, really dark inside the place, and I realized why all the curtains were shut. It almost felt like it was nighttime in there, especially because the only source of light was a dim lamp in the corner of the room. He then looked at me and smiled. I said, "Where there's Noah," and he started acting really jittery and nervous seeming. He said something like, "Oh, I think he's downstairs playing video games. Give me a second. Wait here." He then disappeared into a nearby room, and I heard a door open and then footsteps descending into a basement. I know my heart was already racing. I knew I was in danger. I went to the door to quietly try to open it, but I couldn't. It had some kind of lock that must have needed a key for. I really started to panic now, yet I still probably held out a little bit of hope that Noah would be coming up those stairs, but I knew the chances of that were slim. I regretted entering that house. I did the only thing I could think to do. I went to the kitchen and found a phone hung on the wall. I picked it off the receiver and dialed 911. The first thing I said when they answered was, in a whisper, "Please come to this house. I have been kidnapped." They heard me. They acknowledged me, but I didn't say another word. I hid the phone under a towel in the corner of the room, with 911 still on the line. I hurried back to where the man left me, as I already heard his footsteps coming back upstairs. Then he called my name, saying, "Come down, Noah is down here." Then there was a pause. He repeated my name, and when I didn't answer, he came up the stairs flayed to look at me. He asked me if I was okay. I felt so sick, and I was so scared. I hated myself for walking into the situation and not being wiser. I asked, in a very scared voice, if I could leave, and I remember the change in his face. His fake friendly smile disappeared as he realized that I was no longer falling for this. He walked closer to me in a gentle manner until he was close enough to grab my wrist aggressively, and he started pulling me towards the basement. I screamed and cried, and he screamed at me, "I'll let you go if you stop and behave." So I listened. I went down the stairs, and halfway down, the door slammed shut behind me, and I heard it lock. I walked fully down the stairs to this empty, unfinished basement with a concrete floor and one singular support beam in the middle of the room. There was a depressing yellow glow in the room from one exposed light bulb hanging on the ceiling. If there was a place you'd imagine kidnapped children to go, this would be it. I heard his heavy footsteps upstairs. You could hear everything in this house. I don't know what he was doing, but I heard him walking around for a while. Then he came to the basement door, opened it, and he called down, asking if I'm hungry. I replied, no. I didn't want him going into the kitchen, seeing the missing phone. He shut the door and locked it again. I sat down there, waiting, with my heart in my throat, and then I heard the doorbell ringing 3 times from upstairs, followed by banging sounds, which were definitely the sounds of police banging on the door. I would refrain from screaming until I heard the front door open, but I never heard the man's footsteps approach the door. The doorbell kept ringing, and I kept hearing the bangs. This went on for some time until I heard a really loud bang sound, and then multiple heavy footsteps and multiple screaming voices. I started screaming for help as loud as I could at the top of the stairs, banging on the door. The door was unlocked, and a police officer on the other side grabbed hold of me and hurried me outside. There were at least 3 cop cars outside. I had to tell everything to 2 of the cops outside as we waited for my parents to show up. The man from inside was brought outside and into a cop car in handcuffs, and that was the last time I ever saw him. When my parents arrived on the scene, my mom was bawling her eyes out. There had already been a whole scene at the school as cops were called, and Noah's dad realized what happened. This man was a work associate of Noah's father. When he somehow learned that Noah's dad would be picking up Noah and I from school on the last day, he seized the opportunity to do what he did, a complete sick. I don't know how he found out what I looked like. As I got older, I never really asked for more details because I try not to think about it. My mom went to counseling with me for months after this incident. Let's just say my parents didn't have kind words for Miss Carter, not verifying if I actually knew the person picking me up. If I didn't think to call the police before he basically threw me in that basement, I know for a fact I'd be dead right now. This was like 17 years ago. That man might be out of prison for all I know. It was New Year's Eve of 2019, and all of us were ready for this horrible year to be over. My friend Alex was throwing a house party. I arrived early to help set things up. I secured a spot to sleep in his parents' room, meaning I could drive to the party and drink without having to worry about driving home. His parents obviously weren't home for the night. Most of our close friends in our friend group came, plus a bunch of Alex's friends who I didn't know. The party was fun. At midnight, everyone screams, "Happy New Year," and cheers their drinks. After that, people slowly started circulating out, and the party started to quiet down as people went to either other parties, bars, or home. The later the night got, the more it became just the closer friends staying behind, until it just turned into a chill drinking session in the living room. This went on late into the night. It was likely 3 a.m. when the last of everyone who wasn't sleeping at Alex's house was gone. As it quieted down, we started hearing this occasional sound. At first, we didn't know what it was, but it soon started to sound like a creaking sound. It was dismissed as a sound from the fridge or something at first, which I know sounds stupid, but house appliances often make weird noises. It was just Alex, me, and Jake. Jake was falling asleep on the couch already. It was reaching that time where we were just going to go to sleep. However, eventually we got so bothered by the noise that we had to search. We went to the kitchen, and it wasn't coming from in there. We realized when we were close to the basement door that it was coming from downstairs. Alex opened the door, and we heard this creaking sound. "Go check what it is," I said. He kept saying, "No way." Then he called down into the basement, "Yo, who's down there?" The creaking stopped, and we never heard it again. After a solid minute of waiting at the top of the stairs, we agreed to go down together. We both grabbed knives, drunkenly thinking that was a good idea, when in reality, we were so drunk we'd probably only hurt ourselves with them. We got to the bottom of the stairs and looked through the entire basement. It's not huge. It just has a couch, TV, a bar, a table in the corner, and various old pieces of junk. It was pretty messy at the time. The first thing we did was search any possible crevice for someone who could be hiding. Then we tried to figure out what could have been making that sound. I noticed a rocking chair, and so I went up to it, sat in it, and then started rocking in it, and it made the exact same creaking sound we had been hearing. Alex and I looked at each other. I stood up, and so did every hair on my body. I don't think we ever ran faster than we did when we ran up those stairs and slammed the door shut. We tried to come up with any logical explanation, but there was none. He kept the basement door locked for days until his parents came back. There was no living soul down there, but something was moving that rocking chair. That rocking chair used to belong to his grandma, who passed away forever ago, and it's just something his mom held on to for sentimental reasons. I can't say I've ever experienced anything resembling the paranormal before this, nor since then. It still sends chills down my spine. When I was 23, I had to move out of state for work. I still work with the company, but I've been able to move back to my hometown and work at the local office here. But at the time, I needed somewhere to live that wouldn't be bank-breaking. I made a posting on basically all the websites for a roommate: Facebook, Craigslist, Twitter, and even on my neighborhood subreddit. I had a guy named Mark reach out to me on Facebook, stating he has a room available in his place. I looked at his pictures to see if he looked like a somewhat normal guy, and he did. I was open to the idea of having a male roommate, as long as they seemed normal, even though my parents were very against it. Mark and I FaceTimed, during which he gave me a virtual tour of the place. Apparently, he owned the place outright. It was a modest house in the middle of town, only a 10-minute drive from where my office would be. He also seemed pretty nice. I didn't get any bad vibes at all. His price was fair, and his rules were pretty fair too. He said it was available to move in right away, which was perfect. So it was settled. A week later, I had all my things packed and drove down. I met Mark right out front of the house, where he greeted me and handed me a key. The first thing I noticed about him was he was really short. He was eyeing Lev with me. He helped me bring some of the bigger and heavier bags inside. He showed me my room, which was furnished already. He said one of his friends had been living there and recently moved out. I replaced all the pillows and bedsheets with my own, of course. The rest of that day was me settling in. Mark, I could see, was trying to get to know me and presumably make me feel at home. I didn't get any overly friendly vibes yet. The next day was Sunday. Mark offered to drive me around town to show me around. I wasn't eager to, but I said sure, just to get off on a good start with him. He drove us around town, showing me where the good shopping centers are, good restaurants, and stuff like that. But then he offered to get us lunch. I really wasn't hungry, and he was suggesting a sit-down lunch, almost like a date. I didn't want him to get any kind of wrong idea. I just needed a room. I said, I'm not hungry, and then he right away suggested we go grab drinks somewhere instead. I politely shot it down too, saying I don't drink on work nights. He was being a bit pushy, saying, come on, just a couple drinks. I still maintained my politeness and said another time. He gave up, and he went really quiet all of a sudden, like he was upset. I'll admit I was slightly uncomfortable, but nothing I couldn't handle yet. That week was my first week at work, and so my attention was focused mostly on adjusting to the work week. It wasn't until a few days into the week that I got home and did my laundry and noticed my hamper full of clothes seemed moved. Like the clothes weren't how I remembered they were left. And it wasn't until I was loading the washing machine that I noticed a pair of my underwear was missing. I checked my room top to bottom like 5 times. It was gone. I had a disturbing thought. What if Mark? No, I refused to believe that just yet, and there was no chance in hell I would confront him and ask him that. Still, I was now starting to wish there was a lock on the bedroom door. That weekend, I bought a lockable doorknob from Ace Hardware, and while Mark wasn't home, I swapped out the current doorknob with the new one. Now, I could leave the place in peace. I figured I'd tell Mark the next time I saw him. He didn't come home that night though. He must have been working. His schedule seemed pretty random. That night, I awoke to banging on my bedroom door. It was Mark. He was saying my name, and he didn't sound happy. I checked the time, and it was like 1:30 in the morning. I decided I would pretend I'm asleep. I was honestly kind of scared to open the door. I had a feeling it had to do with the doorknob, and I was right. The next morning, I woke up to a bunch of texts from Mark saying, "We need to talk. Be home after work." I simply responded, "Is this about the doorknob?" And he responded back, "Yes." I apologized to him and said I was planning on telling him. He replied back, "It comes off today." I was getting incredibly nasty and weird vibes from his tone. My next response, I thought out a little longer and basically said how I hope he can sympathize and understand that I'm a girl and just feel safer being able to have privacy in my room. He responded a little nicer this time, but he still basically said no to my request and that the old doorknob needs to go back on. I was confused. I was upset, but I had to respect his rules. I did also install it without telling him, so I felt like he had a right to be kind of mad. But how did he know I changed it? It's not like I had the old doorknobs sitting out in the open. The idea that he tried coming into my room that night kind of scared me. I changed the doorknob back the next day and returned to Ace. This is where things went really downhill though. There was a knock at the door one day when Mark wasn't home. It was a girl around my age. She asked me if I was living here with Mark, and I said yes. She warned me to get out of there immediately. That Mark has multiple restraining orders against him from different girls, and he's known to be a very dangerous, creepy stalker. I was at a loss for words. I asked her how she knew I was here. She said she knew that he was trying to rent his room, and that it's not surprising he opted to have a girl move in. She said she saw me moving in and wanted to wait till he wasn't home to come warn me. I thanked her so much. I truly was terrified now. I had already paid Mark for the entire month. I didn't know what to do. She said she would help me in any way she could. I took her number, and she left. I started packing my things and looking for other places I could move to. I found something across town, a studio apartment sublet for a little more money. I contacted the poster of the ad, and she told me I could move in as soon as possible. Perfect. Now, I just needed to tell Mark and get my money back. I started packing some of my stuff into my car, and I texted him that I'd have to be moving out tomorrow, as something with my family came up and I needed to go home. He didn't answer. He got back to the house about an hour later and asked me about my text. I came up with my best fake story possible, and he said, "Yeah, he'll give me the money back tomorrow after he goes to the bank." I was super relieved. About an hour later, he knocked on my door and then said, "Did by some chance some girl say something to you?" I simply said, "No. What do you mean?" And he said, "Never mind. It just seems like you're running away from here for another reason." I insisted that it was purely because of family reasons. He said, "Okay," and left. Sadly, The story didn't end there. I woke up that night and screamed at the top of my lungs when I saw a black figure sitting on the end of the bed. It was Mark. He turned and put his hand on my mouth and went, "Shh." I said, "Please don't hurt me." And he responded, "Why would I hurt you? I knew someone said something to you. Don't believe what these girls say." I said, "You're scaring me, and this part is still just as insane to me as it was in that moment." He started to caress my leg, and he said, "I don't mean to scare you." Right after I said he's scaring me, I got out of the bed and ran for the door, and he screamed at me to stop. I ran outside with my phone in hand and called the police. I hid in the bush until they showed up, and I explained the entire situation to them. They made Mark come outside and give his side of the story. Basically, I told them I just want to get all my stuff out of the room, and I'm leaving. So the cops stayed there as I collected the remainder of my stuff and brought it all to my car. I also insisted on Mark then mowing me the money back while the police were there, and he did so actually. The whole time the police were there, he tried his best to act like some normal dude, I could tell. One of the officers then pulled me to the side to tell me that this guy had been arrested before for other incidents with women. But Mark denied ever coming in my room or touching me or anything, so it was all he said. I left the house and went straight to a hotel for the night. The next day, I moved into the studio apartment. Luckily, the girl who posted it was able to facilitate my quick move-in. I have never and will never live with another man who's not my boyfriend or husband ever again. Or just anyone I don't know for that matter. I was home alone one night for a reason I don't remember. All I remember is my entire family was gone. I was 15 or 16 years old. I was a big gamer at the time. I was obsessed with StarCraft. And admittedly, I'd sometimes spend a weekend night or two playing StarCraft or some other PC game. This was right before co-lockdown started. I was playing StarCraft on my computer in my bedroom on the first floor. That's when the doorbell rang twice. I hurried to the door, not wanting to be away from the game for too long, in fear of losing. I got to the front door and said, "Who is it?" as I always would if I was alone. A soft and weak voice on the other side said something that I couldn't hear. It sounded like a woman. I opened the door, with the storm door still separating me and this older woman standing on the other side, with a big smile on her face. She had her hands behind her back. I said through the door, "Can I help you?" She said she needed to use a phone and asked if she could come inside. Ever since I was a little kid, I was always taught not to let a stranger into the house, ever. That included women. I felt so awkward though. I didn't know how to turn her away. I redirected her to the library a few blocks down because they'd surely have a phone. Deep down, I knew the library was closed at this point. But I was just trying to get this stranger, who was trying to get into my house, to leave. She was still smiling, but what she said next did not match her smile. She said, "That's very rude to turn away an old lady asking for help." I replied the only way I could think to, and that was that my parents don't allow strangers into the house. It's a house rule. I slowly started closing the door as I was saying sorry, and she just stood there, not moving, but still smiling at me. And though her smile never changed, it suddenly felt much more menacing. I was walking back to my room when the doorbell rang again. There was no way in hell I was opening the door again. That woman radiated weird vibes from the start. Maybe something was wrong with her. Maybe she wasn't all there. These were things I had no way of knowing, and maybe that was selfish of me to send her on her way. But I just wasn't opening the door for anyone when I was home alone. I went back to my game. Not too long after I sat back down, I heard something tapping on the window. It was a clinking type sound from something metal. The window was directly in front of my desk. I had the blind pulled down, so I couldn't see what was making the noise, but I already had an idea. My room was the only room with the light on in the house. The horrible thought that it was the old woman from just before, and that she walked over to my window, terrified me. I turned off the sound on my computer. At this point, I didn't care about my game anymore. The clinking sound on the window persisted. I basically said this and up and left to a different room in the house. I sat in the darkness of the living room for a bit when the doorbell rang again. This woman was harassing me now. I tried to convince myself she wasn't a threat, just some crazy old woman who's probably clueless as to where she is. When she rang the doorbell a second and third time, I decided to go open the door and ask her if there's someone I could call for her. But when I opened the door, there was now a man on the other side. He looked to be about 10 years younger than her. He said through the storm door, "Have you seen my mother?" I replied, saying yes. She came to my door just before. He then apologized to me and said she has dementia and got out of the house. I suddenly felt bad, but he asked me if he could come in for a minute, and again I felt awkward. Why did he need to come inside? I said the same thing that I told to the woman who we claimed to be his mother. I said we could just talk through this door. I then said that I think she went into my backyard because I heard something out my window. I told him he could go around back and check. He thanked me and walked down the walkway, and I thought he went into the backyard, but when I went to the back and looked out the back window, expecting to see him searching around, I saw nobody, not him or his mom. This was all too weird for me. I went to bed on the earlier side that night, just falling asleep with the TV on in the background, until I heard the clinking sound on the window again. Something metal was tapping on the glass. I remembered the concerned man, and I decided to try and help. I went to the window, lifted the blind up with my hand, and I saw that woman outside my window. With that same creepy smile, she was tapping a kitchen knife on my window. I closed the blind and crawled back into my bed. This didn't feel like it was actually happening. A suspiciously short amount of time later, the doorbell rang like 4 times. The clinking on the window stopped. By this point, this was all too suspicious. It felt like some kind of robbery attempt. I ignored the doorbell. I stayed in my bed. I was going to wait this out. I didn't have a cell phone at this time. I wasn't the most social guy growing up. I also didn't want to call the police for some reason. I waited this all out until it finally stopped. The next morning, I told my dad what happened when I called him. He told me I was smart not to open the door. Everyone agreed that everything about it sounded like an attempted robbery. Is there a chance that maybe that woman really did have dementia, and that the man was really her concerned son? Maybe, but it all seemed too coordinated. Why did he want to come into the house too? How did he even know she came to my house specifically? Why didn't he ever go into the backyard to look for her when I gave him permission to do so? Too many unanswered questions that lead me to believe I have avoided something terrible happening. I once worked as a direct care aide for a 65-year-old woman with a developmental disability. Her daughter, who was in her 40s, worked overnights, and she needed a caretaker with medical experience to watch her overnight. When I say I once worked for them, I mean I literally worked once, just this night, and you're about to hear why I never went back. The 65-year-old woman's name was Helen. Her daughter's name, who contacted me, was named Karen. It's possible Karen didn't have any other family to watch her, and didn't want to or couldn't afford to put Helen in a nursing home. Or it was possible that she felt more comfortable hiring somebody with some form of experience to watch over her. At the time, I was already a direct care worker for 2 other women who suffered some forms of developmental disabilities, so I had experience, but nothing prepared me for that night. Karen left for work earlier that day. I worked my first job, so I was really pushing my body to exhaustion, trying to make as much money as possible. Karen had introduced Helen, and Helen had given me a smile before Karen brought her upstairs to her bedroom for the night. It was around 9 p.m. Karen told me that Helen would sometimes walk around the house at night acting confused, and I'd need to calm her down and bring her back to her room. She specifically addressed this not to be a form of sleepwalking. When I asked, She said it's one of the symptoms of her mother's dementia. I told her to rest assured that I'd know how to handle it. I spend my time initially in the living room catching up on my show. These jobs aren't super glamorous, and for the most part, it is a lot of sitting around. I heard footsteps from upstairs. I went to the stairway and looked up the stairs, then called Helen's name, asking if she needed anything. She didn't answer. I heard her footsteps go back to her room, and then the door closed. Maybe she went to the bathroom. I went back to the living room and watched some more TV. It was maybe an hour later that I got up to grab my sandwich that I brought from the fridge. As I left the kitchen with a plate and my sandwich to go back to the couch, I nearly had a heart attack and dropped the plate when I saw Helen standing at the doorway. Glass shattered everywhere. I apologized to her and asked if she was okay. She started yelling at me. "Who are you?" I reminded her who I am. I'm her direct care worker, here to make sure she's okay. Everything she said at this point was in a loud scream. "Why are you here? I don't know you." Things of that nature. I reminded her that we had just met and that her daughter, Karen, hired me to watch her and the house. This seemed to work for long enough for me to get her to come back upstairs with me and to her room. I brought her up a glass of water and some melatonin and calazama. I made sure she took both before going back downstairs. After a few hours, I was absolutely exhausted. I had to get a couple hours of shooty. There was a spare bedroom upstairs with a twin-sized bed where Karen said I could rest if needed. I felt like at this point, Helen was asleep for the night from the melatonin. I fell asleep within minutes, but I was asleep for only maybe an hour. I woke up to a sound from downstairs. It was this repeated slamming every 1 to 2 seconds. Something from downstairs was being slammed. I jumped out of the bed. I had left the bedroom door open so that I'd hear anything if Helen got up. Case in point, right here. When I got to the stairs, I realized the slamming was coming from the kitchen. I walked down the stairs in as quick of a speed as I could, while still remaining quiet. Getting to the bottom, I peered around the opening to the kitchen, and what I saw was like a scene from a scary movie I'd seen before. I saw Helen in the darkness, standing in front of the oven, repeatedly opening it and slamming it shut. It was horrifying. When I say I saw Helen, I really only saw her silhouette. It was that dark in the kitchen. I said, "Helen," really loudly, and she stopped, turned to her left at me, shut the oven door one final time, and started walking towards me, towards the stairs. I said, in a now softer, kind of scared-sounding voice, "Are you okay?" She got close enough to me where I could now see her facial features, and she looked at me with this blank expression, then walked right past me and started walking up the stairs. I followed her upstairs, but as soon as she got to her room, she slammed her door shut. I knocked on the door, saying, "Helen, are you all right?" She didn't respond. I quietly opened the door just to peek inside, and I saw Helen at the side of her bed just standing, facing the wall. I've seen a lot, but this was some pretty unsettling behavior that I feel like is the exact kind of stuff you'd see in some scary movies. Like I mentioned before, I walked over to her and gently eased her into the bed. When she was laying down, I covered her, and for what I was hoping would be the final time, I said, "Good night, Helen," and shut her door. I went across the upstairs to the spare room and went back to bed. I purposely tried not to fall asleep for at least half an hour, just in case she'd wake up again, but I don't even know if I made it that long. All I know is I fell asleep pretty freaking quickly. I woke up once again, however much later. The room was still pitch black, and the 1-hour alarm I set had not yet gone off. I looked around the room, wondering what woke me up. I didn't see what it was until I heard a sound from inside the closet. I then noticed the cracked open closet door and the black shadow of a head peeking out of the closet again. I almost had a heart attack. I said, "Helen." She didn't answer. I kept saying Helen a bunch of times until she pushed the door open and I saw her approaching the bed slowly. She started saying what she was saying hours ago again. "Who are you? I don't know you." As she got closer, I tried calming her down, reminding her who I am. I reached for the lamp next to the bed and fumbled with it until it turned on. Helen was holding a huge kitchen knife in her hand. At this moment, everything changed. Helen was now a threat to my life, and I had to worry about myself, not her. I screamed at this point, "Helen, put the knife down." I guess my scream stressed her out because she got closer and started screaming back at me, still repeating, "I don't know you." I wasn't going to attempt to calm down a knife-wielding dementia patient. That was not in any job description. I mapped out a way to run around her in the bedroom, and I went for it. I jumped off the bed on the side further from her, and she screamed again, "Who are you?" She swung the knife at the air as I ran past her. It was a slow and weak swipe from what I saw, but nonetheless showed that she had intentions of actually using it. I got downstairs and grabbed my shoes and went outside. Instead of calling 911, I called Karen, as she requested I do if there's an issue. I was courteous in doing this because getting law enforcement involved is never doing anyone any favors. Karen was yelling into the phone at me not to leave her, and honestly, I yelled back that she attempted to kill me and that I didn't call the police. She had to leave work, of course. I stayed outside of the house, making sure Helen didn't go anywhere until Karen returned. When Karen went inside, Helen was back in her bed asleep. Karen went as far as accusing me of exaggerating the whole thing until she found the knife next to Helen's bed. To not give her any more fuel to blame me for any of this, I left out the fact that I ever went to sleep. But that doesn't mean that I felt in any way I did anything wrong. Karen even offered me that room to sleep. I never worked in that house again. Helen was a scarier patient than I'd ever dealt with in any of my jobs in my 9 years of being a direct care aide. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad had always told me in life that you should not be scared of ghosts. Fear the living, because they can actually hurt you. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed suicide, and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in the Pacific Northwest by a ski mountain nearby. The cabin had been put up for sale, since my mom could no longer afford the payments, and renting it out was not covering the payments either. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month, and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with the realtor and lawyer. So, for that month's time, the cabin was not going to be rented out any longer, and was just going to be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while, and clear my head in light of all the things going on. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog Midnight, and headed up in my dad's car to the cabin. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal, and nothing out of the ordinary happened. I spent my days playing with Midnight in the snow and snowboarding, and the evenings playing PlayStation or listening to music, drinking and smoking out on the balcony. I had already stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much a shut-in, aside from the occasional out to hit the slopes. With my dog's company and DVDs, PlayStations as entertainment, I was quite content and started to feel relaxed after all the drama that had preceded my outing. The cabin itself was 2 stories. The bottom story had the living room and a side guest bedroom, along with a small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms, along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time was spent either in the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. I never ventured into the other rooms, and always kept the doors leading into them shut. The 3rd day came around, and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog, playing games, and watching DVDs. That day, it was a pretty heavy snowfall, so instead of hitting the slopes, I stayed in. That's when things started getting a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins, aside from these 2, were around a mile away from ours. Surrounding us was mostly forest and very tall pine trees. Both these cabins were empty, and from the past couple of days, I knew that no one was currently staying there. Around midday, while outside with my dog. I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked semi-fresh, like someone had just been there in the last 20 to 30 minutes before me. I thought that maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me that I may not have noticed. Maybe they were shooing like me. Alright, whatever. The footprints led away from my cabin, and they disappeared in the snow towards the denser part of the trees. I disregarded the footprints and went back inside. Nighttime came around, and I decided to head to bed. My dog Midnight was laying on the bed with me when I noticed his ears perked up to a listening position. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I lay in the bed in stayed silence. I was honestly freaked out, and I could hear him moving around downstairs, back and forth. After around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me and started to do his doggy dance for the sign that he had to pee or that he wanted to go outside. Well, fine, I can't say no to him. So we both went downstairs to the outside driveway for him to do his thing, only he didn't want to pee. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull his leash, trying to drag me to where he wanted to go. He kept looking into the dense part of the trees, where the prints had been earlier, but he also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up towards the roof. After he figured out that I was not going to go where he wanted, he sat himself down and just stared into the darkness. A bit unusual for him, but alright. Maybe there's some forest animals out there that he wants to chase down. But fuck this, I didn't want to chase anything, so I pulled him back inside, and we both headed back upstairs. Around half an hour later, I was lying in my bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. It was only a series of around 6 steps, and I rationalized that it could be a pine cone falling from a tree onto the roof, or maybe a kind-hearted forest animal running around. But here's the thing, the steps seemed to be spaced apart like a man-length stride, so it was really freaking me out. Midnight also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony screen door, expecting for me to let him out. Alright, you know what? I'm a tough guy, and at the time, I considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself. So I grabbed my coat and shoes, along with my cigarettes and flashlight, and went out onto the balcony. As soon as I went outside, I lit up my cigarette and started canvassing the roof with my light. Nothing there, and the snow on top was undisturbed. Weird. Was it all in my head? What about Midnight hearing the noise? Maybe he was feeding off my paranoia. I started to calm down and relax again. My eyes started to adjust to the darkness, and I kept smoking and just staring at the stars and trees next to our cabin. That's when I saw it. In a tree that was a little taller than our cabin and around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position in between 2 branches. It looked really tall, like 8 or 9 feet, and it was really fucking skinny. It was squatted on one branch, and its freakishly long white arms were extended above its head, holding on to the branch above it, while its mouth was wide open with no expression. What the fuck is that? I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing, and stood just staring and sat there motionless. I noticed Midnight stand up and start pacing behind me and lightly barking at the same time. The thing still did not move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in the thing's direction, but something in my head kept screaming not to. So I walked backwards to the inside of the room and pulled Midnight with me. Once inside, I locked the door and shined the light in the thing's direct direction, but there was nothing there. I shut the curtains to the screen door and retreated back to bed. But later on in the night, I heard some light tapping at the screen door, like someone was tapping on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent and did not stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door, but he wouldn't go near it anymore. The weirdest part was that I had a feeling like someone was inviting me to open that door, but at the same time, I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head telling me to stay in bed and don't do it. I listened to my dad's voice and just stayed where I was. I passed out eventually and woke up in the morning. It didn't take me long to pack everything and get the hell out of there. This happened when I was a young child, maybe like 8 years old. My parents had me late. My 2 older siblings are both at least 10 years older than me. I was woken up in the middle of the night to a commotion from downstairs one night. It was my parents. I cracked my door open and heard my parents freaking out about something. I wasn't sure what it was. I went to the stairway and stood at the top, calling down, "Mom, Dad." My mom came to the bottom of the stairs and said to me, "Go back to bed." I listened without asking any questions. I could tell they were stressed about something, though. I was trying to go back to sleep when I heard the front door downstairs slam shut, and then it was dead silence. I presumed they left the house, but I wasn't sure why. Either way, I listened to my mom and went back to sleep. I woke up again to sounds downstairs once more. It was the sound of the front door closing, and then footsteps, but no talking. Naturally, I assumed they were back home and just being quiet so that they wouldn't wake me up. I heard occasional steps and thuds from downstairs. I heard drawers and cabinets being opened and closed, and I thought for sure I heard the fridge opening too. I thought it was my older brother Mike, who's 10 years older than me, and at the time he was already driving, so he was going out and coming home late. So him getting home at like 2 a.m. and rummaging the fridge wasn't abnormal at all. These are all things I was telling myself, logical explanations as to what I was hearing. Eventually, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, getting louder and closer until they reached the top, and then made their way first thing to my door. My door quietly and slowly opened. I didn't sit up or move. I just had my eyes open, facing the door. As I was still laying down, there weren't any lights on outside of my room. Whoever was walking around was doing so in the dark, so all I saw was this black mess at my doorway, resembling the shape of someone's head. I said every name, starting from Mike to Mom to Dad. Then I just said, "Who's there?" They didn't reply. They just closed the door, and I was left there confused but mildly creeped out. I heard footsteps going downstairs. I was convinced it was my dad now, just coming to check on me after getting home, though I wasn't sure why he was ignoring me. I didn't hear anything from downstairs for a while now. I allowed curiosity to get the better of me, and I went downstairs in the dark. I kept all the lights off as I was approaching the kitchen, and I froze at the doorway, noticing a tall figure standing right in the middle of the kitchen. I said, "Dad," assuming it was him just based off the size of this person. A deep voice said, "Go back upstairs." I ran back up the stairs to my room and closed the door and jumped on under the covers. All I was thinking was, why did my dad's voice sound like that? The reality of a stranger being in the house didn't dawn on my innocent little mind. Not until a little later when I heard the front door opening and a commotion from downstairs again, the voices of my parents. I went to the top of the stairway again, and they were shocked to see I was still awake. I asked what happened. They told me that Mike had a little accident, but that he was going to be fine. I found out months later that he had gotten into a car accident driving in a condition that he shouldn't have been driving in. My parents got a call from the hospital, and so they rushed to see him first thing, leaving me to sleep. I asked my dad if he had come in my room before, and that was when I learned that they had been gone for hours. My mom started freaking out, yelling at my dad because he had neglected to lock the door when they rushed out of the house. Me telling my parents about the person at my bedroom door and in the kitchen caused my dad to search the house with his gun and my mom to call the police. The last thing I really remember was being asked by a police officer to give my story. My parents tell me that they felt like morons having to explain to the cops that they left me alone and left the door unlocked. I don't think anything of value was stolen, even though whoever broke into the house clearly didn't have intentions of harming me. Having a complete stranger in your house is already a terrifying ordeal. Now, imagine going through that at 8 years old. I don't go on many trips out of town, so this was one of the few times I've had to stay somewhere other than a friend or family's house. The area I needed to stay in was small, and most of the hotels didn't look very nice. But to my surprise, there was a single home listed on Airbnb. It was my first time using the site, but the house looked like a decent place, much better than the hotels. I requested the dates, and in a few minutes, the place was booked. The following week, I started the drive. When I got to the town, which was about 14 hours from my city, it was well into the night. The town almost looked deserted compared to where I was used to living. All the houses' lights were off, and all the stores were closed. No people or cars were out. Of course, it was the middle of the night, so I didn't expect this small town to be lit up and active at this time. But it was still eerie, considering I hadn't seen it during the day. I only came in with this as the first impression. The street that took me to the Airbnb was dark as well, leading through a winding forested neighborhood until I eventually ended up at the house. It was one of a few that had its porch and outdoor lights on, but one window upstairs had a light coming through it as well. I figured the last customer had just made the mistake of leaving it on, so I thought nothing of it and started getting my stuff up to the front door. I got the key code from my email and opened the door, getting inside and locking the door behind me. I quickly put my stuff in the corner of the room, then went upstairs to turn off the light that was left on. It was one of the spare bedrooms, only having a bed and a small dresser in it. I flicked it off, then went to the main bedroom to set up my things. I was only staying for one night, but I had it booked for 2, because I needed to be there late into the following day. I was up for no more than an hour before finally getting in bed and turning in for the night. I rested my eyes and tried to sleep, but was laying awake for a long time. I sat up quickly, hearing a thud run through the walls of the house. I stared at the door, trying to think what could have been the cause of the sound, but with no ideas coming to mind, I got up to check. I opened the door softly, peering into the upstairs hallway. It was dark and quiet now. No more thuds, only the sound of the house swaying in the wind. I stepped back and quietly shut the door, but a strange feeling came to me that had me wait as I thought more about the sound I heard. As I stood there, soft creaks started to go along the floorboards from the other room. I listened with my ear against the door as the creaking moved into the hallway and then began making its way toward the door. I was so in shock that I almost didn't realize that it had to be footsteps of someone approaching. My heart started racing as they came right up to the other side of the door. I put my hand tightly on the door handle to keep it from moving, and only a moment later I felt it pull down. As soon as I resisted it, they eased off. There was a small moment before suddenly the handle was forced down and they slammed into the door. It swung half open before I pressed my body back into it. I only saw half of their face in the doorway, but in their eyes was an anger that I didn't expect to ever see. After a struggle, I somehow managed to push the door back into the latch and lock it. The man on the other side tried to get it back open, but after yelling a few unpleasant words towards me, he ran downstairs and out of the house. I was still catching my breath, and my mind was racing, but I gathered myself up and dialed 911. For such a small town, they came shortly after. The owner of the Airbnb continued with the case after I left on the following day, but I wish I had kept up with it. That man seemed so desperate to get into my room and was in some state of rage, like he wanted to hurt me, as if I'd done something to him. Everything about it is disturbing, and I don't think I'll ever get it out of my head. But Airbnbs probably won't be something I take part in again for a long time. This was about 3 years ago. I was staying in a rental house while vacationing to see my brother. He lives 6 hours away from me, so I don't get to see him very often. And he only has a 1-bedroom apartment, which makes me have to stay elsewhere when I do see him. The house I rented out was really close to my brother's apartment. It was the same price as nearby hotels, so it was an easy choice to go for the house. I had gotten into town early in the morning and met up with my brother for lunch. then got some groceries, and was back at the rental around 5 o'clock. The place didn't have a lot to offer, other than a couch, TV, and bed. But for the price, I wasn't expecting too much. I stayed up until 9 o'clock, then got in bed. It had been a long day, so I was looking forward to getting a good amount of shut-eye. I laid in bed awake for longer than I wanted, falling asleep after an hour. When my eyes opened, the room was in full darkness, and I could sense that it was the middle of the night. Before I could even check the time though, I heard something outside the room, footsteps slowly walking down the hallway, and then a door closing softly, followed by silence. It was like my whole body had frozen, laying in the bed still and staring through the dark room. After a minute passed of no more sounds, I got up and looked into the hallway. At the far end, I could see the front door, which I knew was the door I'd heard them close, but I didn't know if they were still in the house or if they had left. I quietly walked through the other rooms, not seeing anyone. Actually, the only sign of them having been here was the front door being unlocked. I didn't see any footprints or notice anything missing. After checking the locks on all the doors, I called 911. They came fairly quick, but didn't do much of anything. They said to make sure all the doors were locked and to contact the owner. But aside from their useless advice, they provided no intent to figure it out. I stayed up that night and waited until morning, unable to sleep. After calling the owner of the rental and discussing what had happened, I went to see my brother. While out, the owner let me know that he changed the PIN code on the door, which did make me feel a lot better. I was out until late that day though, getting some dinner and drinks with my brother and being dropped off at the rental sometime between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock. I went to the couch and sat down, feeling sleepy, but also feeling that nervousness again about the situation. Every time my eyes were about to close, my head would be filled with fear of the intruder coming back, knowing I needed to sleep tonight. Since I didn't get any last night, I decided to go through the house again and check the rooms in hopes to ease my mind. I walked around the living room and kitchen, then went down the hallway to the bedroom. I opened the closet and checked the attached bathroom, and just before I walked out, I heard footsteps running through the hallway toward the bedroom I was in. I swung around the corner and only caught a glimpse of a large man as he slammed the bedroom door shut. Then I heard his footsteps departing and going toward the living room. While I stood in place and just listened, he went all around the living room and kitchen, staying inside the house for probably 2 minutes, before I heard the front door open and closed behind him. Police came quickly after I called again, and this time the homeowner came by as well. The living room and kitchen looked like they'd been ransacked. The furniture was scattered all over, and the cabinets were all open, with the things inside them having been tossed over the floor. After a closer look, though, the owner didn't see anything that was missing. It looked more like whoever that man was looking for something very specific, and nothing more. I left the rental and got a hotel after that, and within a few days I was never updated again about anything. I assume he was never found, but the situation has left me with a lot of questions. Something that really gets to me is that I had checked the entire house that one night, so where was he hiding? How long had he been in the house with me? Was he watching me? And what would have happened if I had fallen asleep on the couch? I was 18 at the time, and it was the beginning of summer, so I was off from school, and I didn't have any job. The majority of my time was spent inside the house playing video games, watching YouTube or TV, or just relaxing. When this happened, my parents were out of town for a few days, leaving me with the house. This was a common thing, and was never a big deal. Sometimes I'd invite friends over or whatever, but this night I was just enjoying the time to myself. I was watching a rerun of one of my favorite shows on Netflix while also scrolling through my phone. It was late. I don't know the exact time, but I think maybe 11 or 12, when there was a knock at the front door. I paused the TV and went to see who it was. It almost didn't even register in my mind that it was so late, but thankfully it did before I carelessly would have opened the door. I looked in the peephole and saw two men, both wearing similar clothes and just waiting for me to answer. I stood there and thought for a second whether or not to let them know I was home by asking what they wanted. He ended up staying quiet and just watching to wait for them to leave. But a few seconds later, they called out, "Hello, we're here looking to speak with Mr. and Mrs. Ian." That was my parents they were referring to, though I changed the name for privacy. Confused, I still remained quiet, knowing it was far too late for any sort of visit, even if it was important. After a minute, the men looked at each other and said something quietly, then walked off the porch. The outdoor lights were off, so I couldn't see where they went, but I never saw any headlights or cars show up, which had me wondering if they'd walked here, which would only make things weirder. I went back to the TV, but left it on pause for a while, so I could hear if they came back. It only took a few minutes until I heard a pair of footsteps outside the house. They went up to the porch, but instead of knocking like they did before, they started making their way around to the side of the house. I got up and ran to the back window. As they got to the backyard, I saw them open the fence and enter, and I hid away from the window so I wouldn't be seen. But I could hear them go up to the back door. They started talking, then began messing with the door. I took this as my chance to get my phone and hide inside the garage. I called the police, explaining the possible break-in that was taking place. And after less than a minute, a loud pop sound vibrated through the house, and the back door slid open. Their footsteps went through the house and straight to the stairs going up to the bedrooms. A door opened. They entered and closed it behind them, but after that there were no more sounds. I waited for a horrifying and slow 10 minutes in silence before the police pulled up to the house. When they did, there was a few quick footsteps upstairs. Then the two men started arguing. A few officers came in through the back door and ran upstairs, while another came to the garage and helped me outside. The men didn't resist the rest, but they also didn't speak a word on why they were there. Despite weeks going by and it being somewhat obvious that they weren't simply robbing the house, the only thing they could charge them with was breaking and entering. It scares me though, that they seem to be looking for my parents, and it almost felt like they were going to wait upstairs for them until they came back from their trip. I think back to whether or not I should have shown myself, and if that would have stopped the break-in, but something about their behavior tells me that they still would have broken in and would have done to me whatever was necessary. When I was growing up, I lived with my mom in a small house during my middle school and high school years. She took up an overnight job, so most nights of the week I was alone between 8 p.m. and 4 a.m. This happened a few months before I graduated high school. On a regular night at 7:30, I said goodbye to my mom like usual. Then I played some video games for a few hours. It was a school night, so I couldn't stay up super late, but I still stayed up later than I should have. Around 11:30, I shut everything off and went up to my room to get in bed, but I was on my phone for probably another hour before falling asleep. When I woke up, I thought I heard a door closing downstairs. I looked over at the clock next to my bed and saw it was 3:30. So I assumed my mom had just gotten home from work early. I turned over and tried to go back to sleep as I listened to footsteps walking around downstairs. After a minute though, I started listening more intently. Usually, my mom would go straight upstairs when she got home to get ready for bed, but it sounded like they were just walking around. As I listened for another 2 or 3 minutes, I realized they weren't even stopping at all. They were going through each room, walking slowly, as if they were taking a tour of the house. I started to get a little nervous that it might not be my mom and could be someone else. I got up and turned on the light in my room, and almost right away the footsteps stopped. I listened from the other side of my door and still heard nothing carefully. I opened it and looked out into the hallway. I was expecting to see some light coming from downstairs, but the whole house was dark. Whoever was walking around down there hadn't turned on any of the lights, which frightened me more than I already was. I made sure not to make any sounds and stepped further down the hallway until I was at the top of the stairs. Then I knelt down and looked through the railing to see into the living room. Nobody was there, and even in the dark, I could tell that nothing had been moved at all. My PlayStation was still there, and in my head that was a telltale sign that there was nobody else in the house except for maybe my mom. I mean, if someone was here to rob us and had walked through the whole house, they definitely would have taken the most expensive thing in the room. At that point, I just wanted to know if it was my mom who was walking around or if I was having some weird auditory hallucinations. I walked down the steps to the bottom and called out, "Mom, you home?" There was no response or signs of movement in the whole house, so I walked through the hallway into the kitchen. Right away, I saw a shoe print on the tile floors, and when I looked up, my eyes locked on a figure across the room. A man was sitting at the dining table with a dark mask on. His clothing was all black, which made it difficult to fully make out any features of him. He was looking at me, but he didn't say anything or even move. He stared at me with an emotionless look. I ran straight back upstairs and locked myself in my room as I called 911. The operator kept me updated on the police's estimated arrival, but after a minute, I heard the man slowly walk across the downstairs and over to the bottom of the staircase. I was whispering to the operator in a panic until I heard the front door open and the man walking away from the house. Not even 30 seconds later, I saw headlights shining through the window. My mom pulled into the driveway, and I ran outside to meet her and tell her what was going on. When police got there, they did a thorough search and found nothing incriminating that would help us find the man. But from what it seems, the man wasn't there to rob us. He also didn't seem to have any interest in me either, which means that he was most likely trying to hurt or abduct my mom. It would then make sense why he broke in only minutes before my mom usually gets home. It makes me think about what could have happened if I hadn't gone downstairs to see who was there, or if my mom had gotten home just a minute earlier and gone inside, unknowing of the man that was waiting for her. I live on the outskirts of a mid-sized town in Wyoming. The whole reason I live here is because owning a huge plot of land isn't as impossible of a task as it can be in most other states. My house is small, but it was cozy enough for living alone. This happened 4 years ago, in 2019. It was spring, and we were going through a month of pouring rain almost every single day. It was a Sunday, and I was home from work, spending the day watching TV and resting. Sometime around 6 o'clock or 7, I got an unexpected knock at my door. I barely heard it through the rain, and when I entered the door, I was even more surprised to see it was some random guy, not a mailman or anything of the sorts. Someone coming all the way out onto my property without notice was very unusual, being that it was far out of the way. "How can I help you?" I said. The guy, looking some in his late 20s, said he'd been camping out in the woods nearby and had gotten into some trouble and needed a place to stay for the night. With the location of my house, if he wasn't lying, then showing up at my doorstep would make sense because I was the closest place within the woods by at least 5 or 6 miles. It was also pouring out, which made me feel even worse for him. But it still didn't take away from the possible danger of letting a stranger into my home. I offered him a phone call to get a ride into town, but the guy denied my offer. After bluntly saying he couldn't stay here, the guy walked off. I watched him go down the dirt road a little ways, then he veered off and walked into the woods. As odd as that was, I didn't have it on my mind for more than a few minutes before I was back to watching TV. I didn't check the time very often, but it had to be at least 2 hours later and well into the night when I saw an orange glare coming from the window by my backyard. I got up and moved the curtain. Through the rain and fog, I saw a campfire right in the middle of the woods outside my house. It was small, flickering under a large tree as the rain poured down on it. Standing next to it, there was the outline of a figure holding something. I couldn't tell, though, if he was facing my house or into the woods. After a moment, I closed the curtains and picked up my phone. calling the police to let them know about this person outside my house. I knew it would take probably an hour for them to get here, and whoever was out there wasn't doing me any harm. But at the very least, I wanted them away from my house before I went to bed. Once I got off the phone with the officer, I checked the window again. The fire was still burning lightly, but the figure wasn't there. Then I heard footsteps coming toward the house. I ran to the other window and caught sight of him walking past with a hunting rifle in his hand before he turned the corner and went to the front door. He banged on it a few times. Then it went quiet. I grabbed my self-defense handgun from the hallway closet and hid around the wall, still trying to process the situation I was in. He hit the door again. This time, I could tell it was with the stock of his rifle, nearly breaking a panel out of the door. In this moment, I could only think that I had to try to deter him immediately before it becomes life or death for one of us. I shot around toward the edge of the door frame, deafening myself for a second as the shot rang through the house. When my hearing came back, all I heard was the rain pouring down, no footsteps, banging, or yelling. I gathered up courage after 5 minutes of no sounds and looked out the peephole. Seeing an empty porch, and outside in the yard were clear footprints going away from the house. He must have run right after the shot. During the couple seconds I couldn't hear. Police did a thorough search and found some strange details out by where the campfire was. They found the duffel bag with evidence of it having been buried nearby and likely dug up just hours before the attack. What they told me is that it was most likely a burglary kit or possibly even a murder kit that was planted in advance, with the intent to be dug up and used later on. This means whoever attacked me had planned it and had been right outside my house at least once before that night. Why he attacked me specifically is not known, and who and where he is currently is still no closer to being figured out than it was 4 years ago. I still live in the same house and worry every day that he might come back. I'm 32 and live alone in a rural house. I have a few neighbors half a mile down that I talk to sometimes, but I mostly keep to myself and only go into town when I need to. I'm half retired, so I spend most of my time at home, but a few months out of the year I do some contracting work. At the time, it was late fall, and on this day I was getting all of my equipment out in the yard and storing it in the shed to prepare for the winter season. It was just a bunch of tools and lawnmowers and stuff like that that I'd left out anyway. While I was outside, I saw something unusual. A man was walking along the road that connected to my driveway. He had nothing on him, no backpack or camping gear. For context, this road he was on was entirely empty aside from the few houses like mine, and the town was a 4-hour walk away. I watched him until he disappeared far down the road. After he was gone, I looked down in both directions and saw no cars on the side of the road in either direction. It was really odd, but after a while I stopped thinking about it and finished up with my yard. I was back inside before dark and made dinner while I cooled off. As I sat there, a sudden thud from outside startled me up from the table. It was a wooden thump, like it had come from where the shed was. I looked through the window out into the yard, and the door to the shed was wide open. It was old, but the door had never unlatched on its own like that before. Still unsure of exactly what was going on, I knew I had to check on it and close the door, at the very least. I got my rifle, just in case, but I was confident it wasn't going to be anything dangerous. Walking out to the shed, I listened carefully and heard nothing other than the quietness of the night. I looked around the field as well and saw no sign of wildlife or people. When I got to the open shed door, I turned on my flashlight and shined it inside. Nothing looked out of place. I stepped in and did a more thorough search for any animals hiding, but still, there wasn't anything. I closed the door to the shed and made sure it was secure, then started walking back. As I made my way through the field toward my house, an eerie feeling grew inside me. I didn't know what it was, but it continued to grow. As I reached the front door, I stepped in and locked the door behind me. As I walked into the hallway, I saw a shoe print right on the floor. I flicked on the light, and going across the hallway was a line of dirty shoe prints leading up to the spare bare bedroom. My heart started beating faster as I held my rifle up and took a deep breath, then carefully walked up to the door. I leaned my head against the wood and listened, hearing what sounded like someone breathing right on the other side. Before I could even think on what to do next, the handle twisted from my grip and the door swung open. I jumped back and held the rifle up as a man looked like he was about to charge at me, holding a huge metal shovel up. I think my gun stopped him in his tracks, though. He stood in the doorway, holding the shovel like a weapon and having a face full of rage. I yelled as loud as I could for him to stay back, trying to sound intimidating, but I was undoubtedly terrified. The man kept his distance, but his face full of anger never faded. From this moment, though, I didn't know what to do. Cops wouldn't be able to make it here for probably an hour if I called, and I definitely didn't want to hold him at gunpoint for that long, risking anything to happen. As we stood in a strange silence, the man suddenly threw the shovel in my direction, then sprinted back into the room. I ran in to see what he was doing and watched him start crawling out of the window. Part of me wanted to stop him, but another part of me couldn't get myself to. He jumped out and ran off into the field, escaping in the vast empty night, with no way of knowing where he was running off to. To this day, that man has never been identified, and his intentions are unknown. All I can say is that if I hadn't had my rifle in my hands, or if he had gotten the jump on me, I likely wouldn't be here today. This happened a couple years back when I was 26. My single mother had just passed away, and being the only child, their house was left for me to either sell or move into. I was living in a really nasty apartment because I couldn't afford much back then, and after much deliberation, I decided to move into the house. It was already paid off, so I was saving a considerable amount of money by moving in. My goal was to hopefully save up for a few years and get back on my feet, then sell it and buy the house that I wanted. Once my lease was up at the apartment, I moved across town to the house. It was part of a community of farmland owners. But in recent years, most of that land had stopped being used for farming and was left as just empty fields. That's what happened with my mom's land as well. It was pretty much just an old barn-style home in the middle of a huge field, with only a small overgrown path leading to it. In the first week living there, I spent most of my time cleaning and getting all of my stuff where I wanted it. During one of these nights, while I was cleaning, I heard a car coming toward the house. I looked out the window and saw an old pickup truck driving down the overgrown path. It was very strange, being that the only reason for them driving here would be if they were coming to the house. But just as they approached the end of the path, they slowed to a stop. I could make out a male figure in the driver's seat, but couldn't make out any specifics. They stayed there for a moment, with their headlights shining over the field, before they did a three-point turn and drove away. I thought they probably just typed in the wrong address or something, but it was kind of creepy to see someone coming all the way out here so late in the night. A few days went by, and by then I'd finished getting the house cleaned up and organized. It was a Sunday night, and I was staying up late, watching TV and eating a home-cooked meal, when a familiar sound came up in the distance, a car driving toward the house. I looked out the window again and saw that same pickup truck coming down the path, this time with all its headlights off. Knowing it couldn't possibly be an accident this time, I was more worried. I quickly looked at my phone and saw it was nearly 1 a.m., so why would anyone be coming here? The truck came all the way to the front of the house and parked. Then a man got out and started walking up to the porch. I waited anxiously, but after a minute, there was no doorbell or knocking. I cautiously went up to the front door and looked out the peephole. A man was standing right on the porch, looking directly at the door. I was terrified, as he looked like he was contemplating something. Then he turned around and went back to his truck, getting in and hurrying away. I was really creeped out, so I called the police and reported it, but there was nothing else to be done. I went to bed that night with a really bad feeling about everything. Apparently, I was right, because I woke up to what I thought was the sound of a knock at the door. It was just a single knock. I got up right away and looked out the window, but the truck that I thought I'd see wasn't anywhere outside the house. I quietly left my bedroom to try and go downstairs and see who it was, but just as I reached the top of the steps, I could see that the front door was slightly open. I froze, and moments later, I heard footsteps walking through the hallway below me. I quickly hid in the spare bedroom that was next to me and dialed 911 as the footsteps grew louder and started coming up the stairs. They went straight into the main bedroom, and I could hear them moving stuff around like they were looking for something. I was too scared to speak to the officer on the phone, worried the intruder would hear me, so I just sat there silently. They spent a few minutes going through the bedroom, before leaving and going back downstairs, and finally exit visiting the house. I started talking to the officer as I ran up to the back window to see if I could identify them before they got away. It was dark, but I could see that it was the same man who was on my porch earlier. He was walking in the backyard toward the field of tall grass, eventually disappearing in it. Police came by and tried to find any evidence to help with the case, but my description of the man was about all there was that was helpful. I don't know what that man wanted, but he seemed to be looking for something specific. It makes me think maybe he knew of something my mother had, and after hearing of her passing, he wanted to steal it. But once I realized, he had to have known I was home, and probably in the bedroom. It terrified me to think about how he still went in and looked around. What was he planning to do to me if I was still in there? I ended up selling the house a month later because I was too scared of him coming back. Even now, I still check every few months to see if there were any reports of recent break-ins at that address, but it's been quiet ever since that night. For the past few years, I've been working 2 jobs and typically leave my house around 6 o'clock in the morning and don't get home until 10 o'clock at night. Then I sleep, and on most days I repeat that same schedule. Unfortunately, that's just the situation I've been in for a while, but this happened just a couple months ago. I had come home one night and did what I usually do, which is shower and get ready for bed. But while I was in the shower, I heard some movement that sounded like it was just outside the bathroom door. I quickly got out and checked and saw nothing, so I figured it just had to be the house creaking or something. Finished cleaning up and got in bed. All throughout the night, I kept hearing these odd noises coming from all throughout the house. Mostly just some sort of creaking, kind of like if it was really windy outside and making the house sway. But there was no wind and no reason for the house to be making any noise. At one point in the middle of the night, I even got up and walked around to try and find out what it was, but I found nothing. In the morning, I was very tired and had to work the whole day, relying on coffee to keep me awake. By the time I got home, I was exhausted and sleepy, really hoping for a good night's sleep. I went right upstairs and turned the shower on, but before I even got in, I heard something outside the bathroom door again. This time, I was sure it was right outside the door, and it sounded like it passed right by and left the bedroom. Although, as unlikely as it was, it really sounded like something had moved across my room. I knew I had to look to see if someone was there, but I was feeling really uneasy. When I did finally get the courage to look, I didn't see anything. I walked through the whole house and did a quick look around each room, but I was convinced it had to be something odd going on inside the walls or under the floorboards. I showered and got in bed, falling asleep just before midnight. The instant I woke up, I knew something was wrong. It was very dark, so it was still well into the night, and the entire house was silent. I wasn't sure what had woken me up, but I could feel that it had something to do with the sounds I'd been hearing. I peered over at the door and saw the slightest movement of a shadow from under the crack. I jolted up and stared across the room. My heart immediately started racing as I saw the shadow move away from the door and heard them begin walking down the upstairs hallway. I was horrified and frozen in fear, but it must have been the surge of adrenaline that got me out of my bed and made me swing open the door. I looked out, and standing at the end of the hallway was the dark outline of a man. His eyes were the only thing that really stood out to me. They pierced through me with a sense of anger and restlessness. I slammed my bedroom door shut and locked it. The man's footsteps immediately went down the stairs, but I took another 30 seconds before I heard him leave the house. I got the police to come as soon as possible, but they didn't have much luck. They found a few signs of the man being in my house for at least a few days, but that was about it. I don't know where he was hiding, but I always think back to when I'd hear him walk past the bathroom door. Maybe he was sleeping in my bed, then quickly would hide in the closet until I got in the shower, where he would take the opportunity to leave the room. I also wonder why he spent that extra time downstairs before leaving the house, when he knew I'd seen him and had likely called the police. Everything is just speculation at this point, but knowing that some random man was hiding in my house while I was sleeping is a horrifying thing to think about. As far as I know, the man hasn't come back, and there have been no updates on his identity. I was using Craigslist to sell an office chair that I no longer wanted. It wasn't broken or damaged and was barely even used, but I just didn't need it anymore. It took a few days, but eventually I got a message from a man who was interested in buying the chair. We had a short phone call, and he seemed like any other nice guy. He was willing to pay my asking price too, so everything seemed perfect. We set to meet at a local Walmart parking lot, which I opted for to keep it in a public setting. Come Friday afternoon, I called him in and let him know I was on my way. Then I drove down to the Walmart and got there right on time. He said he drove a gray Honda Civic, which I realized was very generic and basically useless information. He knew which car I drove to, so I was hoping he'd see me at least and come over. But time ticked away, and there was no sign of him. I sent a text, and a few minutes later I called, but now he wasn't picking up. I stayed in the lot for nearly an hour, waiting for him to show. But as the sun was going down, I decided to just go home. For most of the drive, I was just annoyed and upset that I'd had to waste my time for absolutely no reason. But about halfway back, I realized that the car had been behind me for a while. I got nervous about it, but once I pulled into my street, they turned away. After going inside and tossing my phone and stuff on the counter, I went back out to bring the chair inside. As I walked down my driveway, a car pulled up along the road and parked right in front of my house. I couldn't tell for sure, but it looked very similar to the car that was behind me earlier. It was a dark red sedan, looking to be at least 15 years old. I quickly got my chair out of my car and went inside, closing the garage and locking all the doors. I peeked out the windows and watched as the car just sat right in front of my house, still running and everything. I checked my phone to see if the man had ever responded, and he still hadn't, and that's when it all really started making me nervous. After another minute, I heard a car door open and close. I looked out the window again and saw a figure in dark clothing standing beside the car, but he was facing the house as if he was inspecting it. Once I saw that, I closed the blinds and dialed 911, explaining to the operator that a creepy man was outside my house and that I think he followed me home. They sent an officer on their way, and I thanked them, then hung up. I pushed the blind up slightly and checked out the window one more time. His car was still there, but the man was gone. I could feel my heartbeat getting faster as I went around to each window and looked. But it wasn't until I got to my back door that I saw the man again. He was standing inside my fenced backyard and was looking up at my house. I didn't know what he was doing, but it was really creeping me out. And all I could think was that at any moment, he was going to try to break in. After a second, the man started walking to the side of my house. I went back to the front window to see if he was going back to his car, but he didn't reappear. Then I went around to every window again, trying to find him, but a few minutes later, the police showed up. The car was still left outside my house, and the man was nowhere to be found. What's worse is that the car was completely empty, not having a single piece of paper or even a fingerprint anywhere inside or outside of it. It was apparently bought from a junkyard years ago, but that was the earliest record they had of it. The police were just as weirded out as I was, especially since the man just disappeared, leaving his car behind and showing no effort to break in. One thing we can say almost for certain is that it was likely the same man from the Craigslist who had used an untraceable email and account and followed me from the Walmart parking lot to my house. It's been a couple months since all of this, but I still worry. Because why else would he have taken the time to inspect my house on all sides if he wasn't planning on coming back any day now to finish whatever it was he came to do? When I was 21, I made the poor decision to move out of my parents' house before I could afford a place on my own. It was something I'd actually planned out for months, searching for cheap apartments, roommates, and anything that could help me move out. For some reason, I just prioritized moving out on my own over everything else. After months of searching, I found a post on Facebook about a room for rent in my area. It was a 2-bedroom house, and the owner was renting out the 2nd bedroom. I sent him a message on Facebook and got a reply in minutes. He asked a couple of questions, then sent over a document. It looked like a huge list of rules for moving in, all simple stuff that's pretty much common sense. After agreeing to all the rules, he let me come over to look at the room that same day. When I got there, I was very surprised at how clean and well put together the place was. It looked like it was a model house, so perfectly decorated and furnished. The owner, Terry, was a little bit weird though. He was in his late 20s, but his personality and looks didn't match the way the house looked. He was wearing a dirty t-shirt and just had a weird way of talking. Still, I was blinded by the possibility of moving out that I didn't even care. A week later, I packed up a rental van with my stuff and drove it down to the house. When I walked inside, I almost thought I'd walked into the wrong house. It was so empty, no decorations or furniture except for an old couch in the living room. It was a completely different looking place than the one I'd seen the first time. Terry was standing there and acted like nothing was different, talking my ear off about how excited he was to have a roommate. I asked about all the furniture and everything, but he basically ignored my question and just went straight to moving my stuff into the house. Being a little weirded out, I still moved in. Several weeks went by, and to be honest, I rarely even saw Terry. He was always working and didn't get home until late at night. But about a month in, I started realizing that Terry had stopped coming home most nights. It was maybe once a week. I'd hear him get home around 2 or 3 a.m. He'd hang around downstairs for a while, then leave, and wouldn't show up for another week or so. Part of me didn't care because I was happy to have the house to myself, but another part of me was curious about what he was up to. I mean, he wanted me to move in so bad, but now he's never here. Then one night at 2 a.m., weeks since I'd last seen Terry, I was woken up to him banging on my bedroom door and yelling my name. I got up and rushed over. Terry was standing in the doorway with sweat dripping from his head and a look of anger. "Do not leave your room," he said in a harsh voice, then grabbed the door and ripped the handle out of my hand, slamming it shut. I stood there in shock, listening to him walk downstairs. I opened the door quietly, and after a few seconds, I heard the sound of him dragging something heavy across the floor and into the garage. I ran downstairs to see what was going on. There was a smear of mud and dirt going across the kitchen and leading up to the garage door. I tried to open it, but he somehow locked it from inside. I realized it was best to just remove myself from the situation and ran out to my car, driving away while calling the cops. When they got to the house, Terry was already gone, and the smears on the floor had been cleaned up. After some days of investigating, it turned out that Terry was actually renting the house from someone else. So I wasn't even allowed to have legally moved in, and all the documents he sent me and had me sign were fake. Terry likely wasn't his real name either, and as far as I know, he never showed back up after that. I don't know for sure what he was up to, but he was so adamant about me staying in my room that night, and with him vanishing afterward, he clearly had something horrible he was hiding. But what really confuses me is why he wanted me to move into the house and live with him so badly. I can't help but think that he had some sort of plans for me, and I barely got out of there without having to find out the hard way. Last year, I moved into a new house far from the city. My new job was work from home, so I had no reason to be in a clustered and expensive city anymore. For the first couple months, I was enjoying everything about the place, especially at being so far from other people. But on a regular weekday afternoon, I got a knock at my door. This was actually the first time anyone had come up to my door at this place since I moved in, so it caught me a little off guard. I went up and opened the door to a tall, middle-aged man. "How can I help you?" I smiled to be friendly, thinking he was probably a neighbor from down the street. But strangely, the first thing he did was lean to the side and look past me into my house. It was like he was trying to see who else was home. Being weirded out by his behavior, I pulled the door in and blocked the way with my body before saying anything. The man turned and walked away from the door. I stayed and watched him go all the way down the driveway and continue walking until he got to the street, where he got into a parked car and drove off. Without a doubt, that was the strangest encounter I'd ever had with someone up until that point, and I really had no idea how to even think about it. That night, I stayed home for dinner just to make sure the man didn't come back. I debated calling the police to put in a report, but I thought I'd sound stupid for doing that just because some man came up to my door and did nothing. Around 9 p.m., I turned on the TV and tried to get myself more relaxed before trying to sleep. While I was on the couch, though, I heard a voice speaking outside. I quickly muted the TV and listened. It was muffled, but I can make out at least 2 separate people talking somewhere in the back of my yard. I ran up to the back window and opened up the blinds. In the distance, I could see 2 figures walking across my backyard. One of them had a long tool or object in his hand, but the other one was too hard to see clearly. They walked between the trees in my yard until they reached the side of my house. I went over to the side window and tried to see where they went, but I lost track of them, and they had stopped talking. I checked every window and still couldn't see or hear them anymore. The loud knocking at my front door made me jump and sent chills through my body. I walked up, trying not to make any noise, and looked through the peephole. There was one man dressed in dark clothing. He had to be one of the men I'd just seen, but where was the other? "What do you want?" I yelled, figuring they likely already knew I was home, or maybe I'd scare them away. The man stayed on the doorstep and looked over at the side of my house, then looked back at the door. After a few seconds, the lack of response started to terrify me. I went back to the living room to get my phone and call the police, but was interrupted by a loud smashing sound, followed by another and another. I looked across the hall and saw a man hitting a shovel against the back door. He saw me and looked at me for a second, then ran away. I was so scared I hesitated on whether to call the police or try to find somewhere to hide. The best answer was obviously to do both, but my thoughts were interrupted again when I heard the side window getting hit. I got my phone and dialed 911 while the man continued to hit the window over and over. But just as the police picked up the phone, everything went quiet, and it stayed quiet until the police came. When they pulled in, I was surprised by a sudden commotion outside. It turned out to be the man at the door, who had chosen not to leave, and after a closer look, it was the same man who'd come by earlier that day. Strangely, when the police detained him, he refused to say anything about the other man that was with him. He denied everything over and over, even though there were clear cracks and dents in the doors and windows. It was frustrating to listen to, and even weeks later, the man still refused to detail why he had come by my house twice that day, or who the other man was. Everything remains so unanswered that it still creeps me out to this day. Why was the man trying to break in so bad? And what purpose did the man at my doorstep serve to aid in the break-in? I moved away in the following months, and I've since only been hoping that it wasn't me they were after, or are still after. I was 22 at the time, and living in a very small one-bedroom house in the cheapest area of my city. After work on a Friday night, I hopped online to play games with a bunch of my friends. It was the perfect night for staying up late, with heavy downpour outside and no work or school the next day. We played for probably 2 hours before a sudden sound had me put everything on pause for a minute. It was a thump, sounding like it was upstairs. My initial concern was a possible leak in the roof caused by the rainfall, so I went up to look. The only rooms upstairs were the single bedroom and a half bathroom, and neither of them had any signs of leaks anywhere. So I ran back down and got back online with my friends. I was on for a while, only getting off at 2 a.m. because everyone else went to bed. I shut everything off and sat on the couch with some snacks while I watched YouTube on my phone. 10 minutes in, I heard another thump. It was from upstairs again, but it was so muffled that it almost sounded like it was on the roof or something. I did an even more thorough search of both my bedroom and the bathroom up there, but there wasn't anything showing itself to be the cause of the sound. I was sure it wasn't thunder either, because it vibrated through the walls like something literally hitting the house. After 10 minutes of looking around, I was so determined to figure it out that I put on my shoes and went out into the rain to see if there was something more noticeable from outside. At first I saw nothing of significance, but then I noticed a tree branch getting pretty close to the side of my house. It was a large and sturdy branch that was a good 3 or 4 feet away from the sighing, and even in the rain it wasn't really swaying all that much. It seemed unlikely that it could reach the side and bang up against the side of the house. As I looked at it though, I realized there was a small window on the house that the tree kind of covered up. It was higher than my bedroom window, meaning it had to be an attic. I had no idea there was an attic at this house. The hatch was definitely nowhere noticeable, and the roof wasn't a steep slope, so it didn't look like there would even be room for one. This hidden window was the first I'd ever seen to indicate there being an attic. I went inside even more curious than I was before and started searching for this hatch that I had to have somewhere. It took a minute, but I found it inside my bedroom closet. It was small and perfectly smooth, with the ceiling basically blending in, aside from the tiny gaps from where it opens. I stood up on a box and pulled it down, releasing a rusty ladder from the opening. Immediately, I was hit with a rotten smell, followed by another thump sound from below. I could tell the attic was extremely short, maybe 2 feet tall at most. I climbed up carefully and looked into this tiny space, basically a wide dark tunnel. And at the end by the window I could make out a figure ducked down on all fours and looking straight at me. I almost fell off the ladder trying to jump down and run away. I heard them shuffling around as I got my phone and left the house, calling 911 in my driveway. The cops got there and detained the man, who was just some homeless person. Apparently, he climbed the tree up to the window and made his way in, staying up there for at least a week without me having noticed. The absurdity of it all was almost unbelievable. I moved out very soon after that. In every house since, I've always checked the attics. But the one thing that has stayed with me is the image of that man at the end of the attic, on his hands and knees, staring at me with eyes resembling both fear and anger. 3 years ago, I moved down a few states on the East Coast to a new city. Due to work of money, I couldn't make the trip to see the place before making the move. But I was only renting, so there wasn't too much risk in it. It was mid-September when the movers came and loaded everything up, then dropped it off at the house. The landlord was nice enough to let the movers in for me to unload, because I wasn't actually arriving there until the following week. It was a Monday evening when I finally arrived and saw the house in person for the first time. It was a mess, with boxers everywhere and furniture laying all around, but the house itself was all right. The layout was interesting in that it was very separated. It was a single story, with the kitchen and living room on one side of the house. Then on the other side was a long hallway with all the bedrooms and bathrooms. Since it was already late, I went to the master bedroom and started working on getting the bed put together, then shut off all the lights and went to sleep. I didn't have a clock set up yet, so I don't know what time it was, but in the middle of the night, I woke up to an odd sound. I thought it was a noise the house was making, but I wanted to see what it was, and if it was something I needed to let the landlord know about. I got up and walked over to the room door. As I got closer, though, I realized it was coming from somewhere down the hallway. I opened the door, and it stopped almost instantly. The hallway was pitch black, so I flicked on the light, but nothing was there. I slowly walked down and peered into the living room. It looked the same as it had earlier, but I turned on the lights and looked around just to be sure. On the floor, there were a lot of footprints scattered between the boxes that were laying around. I knew it was likely from the movers, and with no other signs of anything, I went back to the bedroom. It took a while for me to fall asleep again, because I kept thinking about how the sound stopped as soon as I opened the door. I tried to come up with any possible way this could be the house making noises, but nothing came to mind. When I drifted back asleep, it felt like I only stayed asleep for a minute before I was woken up by a sudden thump, followed by footsteps running down the hallway. My eyes shot open, and I looked over at my bedroom door. The door was wide open, and on the ground were clear footprints coming right up to my bed. I got up and hurried to see who was there, but by then they were long gone. All that was left were scuffed prints from them running away. I got my phone and called the police, locking myself in the bathroom until they arrived. When they did, they oddly found no signs of a break-in, aside from the footprints. I convinced myself that they must have gained access during the week before I arrived at the house. But something still didn't sit right with me. After unpacking and checking each box, nothing seemed to be missing. It obviously makes me wonder what they were even doing in the house. But the biggest mystery is, why did they walk up to my bed? And what was that thump sound that I heard just before they ran away? The landlord was eager to allow me to break the contract and move out, so long as I didn't say anything about the break-in publicly. At the time, it sounded like he just didn't want anyone to be scared away from the house, so that he wouldn't miss out on his rental income. But now, I'm not so sure. And that wraps up tonight's terrifying tales. Want to see more of this content? Click the video on screen to watch more real horror story tales. Which story chilled you the most? Tell us about it below. Also, if you have any horror stories you would like to share, please comment that too. We will pick the best ones and do a video on it in the future. And any other topic suggestions you want to see on our channel, do let us know. Until next time.